This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Police and Crime Committee meeting this morning. We'll be holding our monthly question and answer session with the Mayor's Office for Policing and Crime, MOPAC, and the Metropolitan Police Service. Could I ask everyone to make sure that your electronic devices are switched to silent mode to avoid any interruptions? Can I ask our clerk, Lauren Harvey, if any apologies have been received?
Thank you, Chair. We've received no apologies this morning.
Thank you. Can I ask the committee to note the recommendations set out at item 2 and ask members if they have any other interest to declare? Thank you. Can we confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 21st of May 2025 to be signed by me as a correct record? Thank you. Can we note the ongoing and closed actions arising from previous meetings of the committee and the additional correspondence sent? Agreed. Thank you. Can we note the Met's response to the committee's report on public order policing and the government's response to the committee's report on violence against women and girls? Thank you. I'd now like to move on to our main item of business, and I'd like to welcome our guests, Deputy Mayor Kaya Comer-Schwartz, who is the Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime, and a big welcome to Matt Dukes, the Deputy Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police Service. And first of all, congratulations on your appointment. And this is your first session, so you're very welcome, and it's great to see you. What we're going to do is start with you, Matt. No pressure, but if you've got a statement that you'd like to make, and we're very much looking forward to hearing from it. And then we'll have a conversation about the spending review that was announced a week ago today, and some questions and answers on both those items. Thank you.
Chair, members of the committee, thank you very much, and thank you for the welcome. It's a pleasure to be here representing the Met in front of this committee. I'm briefly going to recap how I come to be here, but mostly was just going to make a few observations about the condition and performance of the Met at this moment as I step into role, and then, as Chair, you've indicated, we might get on to questions which are contemporary and relate to recent events, including the spending review. I've got some service in the Met, but I'm a newcomer to this committee. I joined the Met in 2020, and I've spent the majority of the years since as the Assistant Commissioner responsible for specialist operations, the head of counter-terrorism policing and its network for the UK. My policing career stretches back to 1995. In the east end of a different city. So I joined South Yorkshire Police and worked in Sheffield and its east end all those years ago. In 2010, I moved to, again, a different capital and worked in Cardiff and the surrounding area in South Wales Police, finishing my period there as its Chief Constable. And then, as I've mentioned, moved to the Met in 2020. At this point in time, I think important to acknowledge the debt we owe my predecessor, Dame Lynn Owens. I'm able to step into this position, effectively Chief Operating Officer for the Met, supporting the Commissioner at a time when we have exited the special measures, the engaged process that our inspectorate had placed us into, and at a time when we consider a significant opportunity to pivot from transforming and reforming as our principal priority to really focusing on performing in crime and confidence for the communities of London. We're going to do that most explicitly, and high on my to-do list is to refresh and reissue, in conjunction with the Commissioner and of course with the Mayor's Office, the second iteration of a new Met for London. So our plan, the turnaround plan put in place 2.5 years ago by the Commissioner, has run its 2-year course. We're now refreshing that plan to focus on service delivery. We are going to remain focused on areas of trust, on crime and standards, and we'll unpack some of those, I'm sure, Chair, in the course of this conversation. But we're seeing significant strides in terms of the training of officers to deliver in areas that impact crucially on trust. We're seeing real impact on crime starting to emerge, and I'll talk a little, if I can just get to concluding these comments, about some of the early signs of improvement in crime performance. And critically, we're seeing a real shift in terms of our approach to standards. The most significant signal of that change is our exit from the arrangements known as Engage, the special measures. Over the last 2.5 years, Met officers and staff have worked tirelessly to address over 100 recommendations from our inspectorate, causes for concern and demands for improvement to the service to the communities of London. It is a rigorous process in which we are held to account, and the endorsement of the inspectorate is not given lightly. We've seen in the last months the evidence of a stabilised Met starting to perform better for London. So in the last few months, so since April the 1st compared to the same period the last year, neighbourhood crime significantly reduced, down nearly 17% on the previous year, 9,000 fewer victims of crimes like burglary, car crime, street robbery, and improvements consistently across our outcome rates, the charges and other positive outcomes in relation to perpetrators of those crimes and serious crimes of rape and sexual violence. We've seen continued reductions in knife crime. And of course, I should say, against all of this, this is the product of the hard work of dedicated officers and staff. So over the last 15 months, the number of arrests we make month on month has increased by 10%. We're not complacent, and we are facing into some headwinds. So those headwinds, Chair Committee, clearly include the spending review, perhaps a moment to pivot towards that. But they also include the wider context of the criminal justice system, which I'd welcome the opportunity in the course of this session to unpack some of its implications for policing London, all of which, of course, ultimately makes the biggest difference of all to communities. In terms of the spending review, to give you I suppose, a trailer, Chair, if I may, in terms of how we run into the spending review. You will know from previous conversations in this committee that the Met has a structural funding deficit as compared to other capital and global city police organisations, a decade behind us in which predecessors were unable to invest in estates, in infrastructure, in technology, and in effect we entered this year with the prospect of a £260 million funding gap, with a rising demand and inevitably a shrinking workforce. A great deal of work has been done to close that gap to a point of a balanced budget. I want to acknowledge that both the Home Office, the Home Secretary and the Mayor have heard our case, and we know have played that case forward into spending review conversations, have found along that journey some funding which has enabled that gap to be closed. But we have been left nonetheless within the region of £160 million of very difficult choices. The Met, as we get to the end of this financial year, will be 3,300 people, or in the region of that, smaller than it was 2 years ago. And along the way, we will have had to make difficult choices, the majority of which are now behind us, leaving us fewer of those looking into the future. So choices that we might think were at all easy, we haven't really found them. We're talking about tough choices, and the choices get tougher as you go into the next period. I could talk more about the medium-term challenge that presents our estate, the challenges of achieving net zero across the next decades. But to be candid, the challenge we really face into is how to maintain our service to communities over these next years. And I think we should be very plain that the Commissioner and I are keen to maintain a sense of purpose, progress, positivity. We do not want to simply oversee a period of managed decline by an organisation which gets steadily across its broad front less and less effective or smaller. And therefore, we are determined to succeed, but we will have to succeed on a narrower front. The only way for us to be the best we can be for London is to be very purposeful about our focus and to drive forward effectiveness, efficiency, strong partnership working where policing makes its unique contribution on a front which is inevitably narrower than it has been in the last period. But cause for hope, I think, if I may stop there, Chair, in the more than green shoots of improvements in our performance for Londoners, which demonstrates when we put our money and our commitment behind our priorities, neighbourhood policing, tackling rape and sexual violence, addressing the most harmful perpetrators of violence against women and girls, we can and are making a difference. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Commissioner, and thank you also for acknowledging the work of Dame Lynn Owens, and on behalf of the committee, could I pass on our very best wishes to her, and thanks to her as well for her work. Deputy Mayor, I'm going to ask you now to make the statement about the spending review.
Thank you, Chair. Likewise, as the Deputy Commissioner has said, we know that the government announced in the spending review that there will be an increase of spending on policing nationally of 2.3%. We don't know the exact details of that yet, and that will be coming forward in the coming months, but I'm sure committee members have noted that the Mayor is frustrated by this result. We're disappointed and we have real concerns about how that will work in terms of it not being enough for the Metropolitan Police, as the Commissioner has outlined the stark challenges that they face currently due to decades of underfunding. We want to work now to make sure that we get the best possible offer out of those numbers. We know that there'll be a lot of more details coming forward in those spaces, and it's our job, as it has been previously, to make the very, very best case for London. I want to thank the police for working alongside us in making that case to the Home Office and government around what London really needs. We know that we are the capital city. We know that we have additional pressures that elsewhere in the country just does not have, and that we need the officers we need on the street. We do note that in the spending review, it talks about making sure high standards continue, making sure that there's reform, using technology to drive efficiency, and so we want to see more detail on that too. We also note that there has been investment in the wider criminal justice system, and perhaps, Chair, if we may, we might talk about that later when we come on to the sentencing review, but that is to be noted. We know that in the police and crime plan that one of our areas of ongoing concern is the wider criminal justice system and how prisons, probation, courts have been in crisis. So that is, in the wider ecology, something to be welcomed, but we continue to be concerned about what it will mean in terms of police numbers. We note in the spending review papers that they continue to talk, the government talks about their ambition, the manifesto ambition to have 13,000 additional officers across the country. So, with that being said, we want to make sure that our slice of that in London is correct.
Thank you very much. I'm going to open the floor to questions now to our panellists. Assembly Member Hall.
Thank you. Good morning, both. If I can start with you, Matt, you said that there'd be 3,300 people smaller than a couple of years ago. What's your anticipated number of officers and staff, those separate numbers?
Yeah, thank you. So at the end of that period, we'll get closer to a number of officers, which is around 31,000. That will be a number which is similar to the low point we experienced per capita in the middle of the last decade. And in that period since, of course, the population of London has continued to grow. So we'll move, in effect, from an organisation in the region of 44 to 45,000 people down to something around 41,000. We are at the moment working through the consequences of that for our people. We'll need those in roles which we can no longer prioritise to move. We're working through processes of introducing police staff to move out the officers who might be capable of carrying out a wider range of roles. So alongside a shrinking organisation, over 10,000 colleagues are currently engaged in discussions about what the nature of their role will be in the future. So a smaller organisation in the order that I've described, and also a period of significant concern and instability for a number of people in the workforce. Important to say, the majority of the workforce will be in the roles they're in now, and will continue to do jobs which they have pursued and sought. But a challenging period for our people is what I wanted to acknowledge.
Well, it's been challenging for quite some time, and the Commissioner mentioned taking officers out of the staffing roles about a year ago. So how many do you think have changed over now? How many have moved?
So that's an in-flight piece of work, which I think we'd be pleased to give you a written update in terms of the fine detail of the movement. But we're talking about areas like our control rooms and contact centres. So in the past, we've had significant numbers, exceptional numbers compared to national comparisons of officers taking calls from the public and dispatching resources. We are underway now with the process of moving those officers out and moving new staff colleagues in. That in itself brings a challenge that we have to bring new people and skill them to do those roles. There's a degree of recycling of experienced police officers into police staff, given what has been the pattern in the past of younger retirements. But that approach is running its course. And of course, we don't simply just want to recycle our past people. We want to recruit new and others. So we'll certainly provide an update in terms of the areas of modernisation, civilianisation, which are in flight, and the numbers that are involved. But that is part of the process of moving to a smaller officer cohort than we've had before. There is a de minimis level of that, I should say. I mean, we are very keen to boost the capacity to deliver core policing using talented officers and staff. But a previous commissioner once said that, you can't throw laptops at a crowd, and the same's true with moving to a more balanced staff and officer mix. There are roles which we ultimately need. We need officers to carry out and can't do simply with staff. So we'll give and we'd be very happy to give a further report in terms of the progress specifically.
Would that be helpful? Because we were told about this, I think, about a year ago, and it made sense to get warranted officers back to doing what they were actually supposed to be there. I mean, this is absolutely dreadful, the situation you're facing now. So what exactly are you going to stop doing, definitely? I know it's being talked about, but we know that schools officers are coming out the schools, which I think is dreadful, and putting them in local safe enabled teams. Many of us don't think that, including officers, I wouldn't presume to know better than police officers, but I've been told by police officers that won't work. I mean, what else are you looking to move or stop?
So I think there are a range of interventions, some of which are going to feel closer to the community than others. There are some choices within all of this which we would have made anyway. There are legacy approaches which are not efficient. But I think we've got to be candid and say we're describing them as tough choices for a very specific reason. These are not all choices we would have made otherwise. But we are strengthening our neighbourhood policing model, putting youth engagement and schools officers into those teams. I've seen that work effectively elsewhere, and we want to bring them closer to the rounded 24-hour experience of young people in our communities by getting them out on the streets as well as remaining engaged with schools. That's a positive choice. You'll be aware of changes which I think have been discussed and described here in relation to the way the Royal Parks are going to be policed. We are going to reduce the opening hours of front counters at a number of police stations. Again, that's all reflected in the budget papers which have been played forward here before. But that also reflects a shifting use of those services by the public. There are some other areas which I think we're going to have conversations with a range of partners and communities around. You'll be aware that we've been working on a programme called Right Care, Right Person, the reduction of police officer contact time in mental health cases, including lots of cases where very probably policing was likely to be not the best service to respond, or even a service that could make a situation worse. That has led to a reduction in police demand from those sources. But if I give you one other example of demand we're going to have to tackle, when police come across a young person, child who they're concerned for and take into police protection, there is often a delay in achieving that protection, which then needs to flow from partners in local authorities who themselves are under enormous strain. In a given year, we're spending something like 16,000 police officer hours waiting for that care and support to come to the child. And so we are effectively sitting with children in police stations waiting for children's services to be able to respond to them. And I say that without judgment in terms of the condition of those other services, but there are all sorts of points in our system like that where we're going to have to ask questions about whether there are better ways of responding to that challenge, and in particular whether we can do a better job in safeguarding children by being out of police stations, on the streets and in homes, rather than spending 16,000 hours a year doing that.
Yeah, like the situation with mental health patients in hospitals, and that's been successful, so I get that. And how will London play a part in the National Grooming Gang inquiry, and where will the funding come to facilitate those inquiries?
So we'll obviously now participate fully in the next stages of any of the work which flows from Baroness Casey's report published on Monday. Members of the committee will appreciate it's an over 200-page report in its totality, and we've only had a period of a couple of days to absorb its recommendations, but we will be active and engaged. We have child exploitation teams across London who are occupied every single day with pursuing the risks of criminal exploitation and child sexual exploitation in our communities, and so we'll be determined to fully participate in any consequences which flow. In terms of funding for the inquiry and any costs which might fall to policing, we have no answers on any of those questions at the moment.
Okay, my last comment or question, really. You mentioned that you've increased arrests, so that's a really good thing, except, of course, you increase arrests and the criminal justice system is just letting people out almost quicker than you put them in. Is that not very frustrating when you're actually managing to get these villains, try and put them away for the safety of all of Londoners, for them to only be let out again because there's no space in the prisons?
So I think there are several points in the criminal justice system which are severely strained. I mean, the front end of that, the criminal justice process, remand through to trial, through to imprisonment, release, and our biggest concern, I could dive a bit deeper. We're going to talk about the sentencing review in a separate question. I could dive a bit deeper at that point in terms of the specifics, but our overall concern is that the position of policing, and more importantly of communities, has not been fully recognised in the work that's been done to date. So in bringing forward recommendations in the independent sentencing review, there is no recognition that by placing more people into community sentences or placing offenders earlier into communities post-custodial sentence, there are implications for communities and for policing and supporting community safety. We don't believe those have been accurately captured and reflected in the work that's been done to date. You simply can't take the cost of keeping somebody away from the risk they pose to the public in prison and then place that in the communities and not pay heed to what that might be. And so far we feel that's the condition of the reviews. You'll know, because it's been commented on publicly, these are points we've made to government, and we are keen to work with government to understand where those costs will fall now, because we do recognise that for more than a decade we've had a sentencing policy and a prison building policy which have not moved in tandem. So we fully recognise the dilemma which the government is presented with, But there is another dilemma in this, which is where the cost of managing those risks, and of course supporting reduced reoffending and supporting offenders to move on to hopefully a crime-free life in the future. All of that comes with cost, and more of that cost is being placed into communities, appears to be the direction of travel.
Thank you. Thank you for your answers.
Thank you. Assembly Member Duval.
Thank you. Just following on from the earlier questions posed by Assembly Member Hall. So just moving on from the emphasis on the front line in policing, where you put the resources, how far have you got, and in that thinking, around reproducing investigation teams? I think warrant officers in policing is important, but there are some tasks that police officers do that can be supported by non-warranted officers in investigations or in overseeing some policing activities. So where does that fit in terms of your thinking, and what would we see over the next year if there is pressure on the resources that you say, and I believe there are?
Yeah, thank you very much, Assembly Member. So I think, as the Deputy Mayor has alluded to, London is unusual in UK policing. You would expect it to be. And we need a workforce which can deliver every day for communities of London and can also mobilise in its thousands to deal with protests and state visits and major public events. And therefore the balance of officers and staff which you might expect in London might be different than other parts of the country. But we're out of kilter. I mean, we're plainly out of kilter, and we have officers carrying out functions which could be fulfilled by police staff members who can now be empowered. So you can give legal powers to carry out certain investigative activities to non-officer colleagues. So we would see the development of responses to volume crime, including police staff investigators. There are a number of areas where we're looking at modernisation in our major crime investigation work. So, there are, despite the TV dramas being full of detectives, treading the streets and working with great intuition and doing all of those things, the reality of murder investigation is it's hugely technical and usually vast in its scope, supported by a very important middle back office of people working in major incident rooms. Those roles will be areas where we'll see more modernisation, more civilianisation over the next year. We're in addition to policing today's problems, also required to pay attention to our history, which means quite a lot of policing looks backwards, inquests, inquiries, reviews, as the Assembly member has alluded to. And we would prefer to use our active street-based officers who can carry out those roles to police today's challenges, and use more police staff members, contractors, retired colleagues to do some of that work, which takes us back into history. So all of those areas will see a different balance between officers and staff. As I've alluded to, call handling is an area where many forces around the country have moved to an almost exclusively staff model. We've got some brilliant people in those call centres, staff colleagues who've been taking calls for decades from the public. They do it with incredible empathy, precision. It's tough work. It is actually frontline policing work. I mean, we talk about the front line as sort of bobbies on the beat, but the reality is if you're taking calls from distressed members of the public 24 hours a day, that is tough work, and we rely on more and more staff colleagues to do that. So those would be a number of the areas we would see change in. As I say, we'll have to, in the end, determine a balance, and we are also in the process of paying attention to which officers can fulfil roles when, for example, they're injured on duty. I mean, we will always have colleagues who, in long careers, have ill health, colleagues who are injured on duty, and we need to also determine what proportion of officers we can have in a condition we describe as adjusted duties, but those officers who can be away need to be away from the absolute front line. It's quite a lot of change in summary, which is why over 10,000 people are in conversations about changing roles.
And so the other side of that, so you started thinking of that, it'd be welcome if you could write to the committee and explain where some of those changes are taken on, because we need to carry the public with us, but there's no difference. As you said, crime fighters come in all shapes and sizes. Some are warranted officers, some are not. it comes to that phase of the woman in the NASA centre who's cleaning up after people, and she's asked, well, what do you do? And she says, I'm putting a man on the moon. So, that comes to a phrase about all of the organisation and the treatment of that. But the other side of this is about flexibility of funding, isn't it? How far, and do you see it as a central objective, explaining to the Home Office that you could get more bang for your bucks? If yes, we do need the policing officers because they have an appropriate and important role, as you said, not just in terms of their day-to-day service, but sometimes in public order incidents when they're called out in times of woe, to support the cadre of specialist trained officers. But, does the Home Office realise that actually the debate on police numbers is important, but actually police assets in terms of delivering that is one that we need to get across, and flexibility, that sometimes we should maybe pull on police officers and employ more of those crime fighters in terms of those support roles, because we might get more bang for our bucks in terms of the resources and different outcomes.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Val, and thanks for acknowledging the contribution of those colleagues. I think volunteers, staff members and officers are part of one team in the Met, and we need to continue to promote that. We are consistently frustrated across different forms of government. I mean, this is not, I can say this absolutely apolitically, that police officer numbers are somehow used as a proxy for police capability and capacity. They are, for the reasons I've described, not an unhelpful way to see a certain amount of our capability and capacity. But in an age where we've seen a rapid shift to online offending, where the quantity of data we're dealing with is beyond any human knowledge, there's no officer who can hold all the wanted people in their heads that live facial recognition can deliver as a capability. There are other ways for us to fight crime other than just loading officer numbers as a single measure. The Met entered this period, both the police uplift period of in the previous government and the commitments being made by this government, imbalanced relative to other forces, and it's harder to reset that balance when funding is ring-fenced for officer numbers. So we recognise governments will want to tie policy commitments to spending commitments. That's kind of how government works, isn't it? But for us, being robbed of flexibility or being constrained on flexibility severely inhibits our ability to put the resources where we need them most to deal with changing crime types and to maximise the capacity of our people. And the spend, in the end, officers are a relatively expensive resource. There is sometimes a net off for that if you want a member of staff to work 24 hours a day in public-facing duties, the cost differential isn't as great in the end. But it's really not always an economic choice. Our staff members bring great skills, talent, diversity. If you want data scientists, as we need, today to do our work, you are unlikely to find those in the same numbers in the hundreds of recruits we'll bring through every year through Hendon as officers. They're much more likely to be in the marketplace of potentially talented staff members. So we would appreciate more flexibility. It's a point which has been made repeatedly. And on that basis, I think you would expect us to continue to make it as we go forward into tougher times, because by constraining certain parts of the workforce, you give us fewer choices.
Thank you.
Thank you. Assembly Member Roberts.
Thank you and good morning. A question for the Deputy Mayor, if I may. Last year's manifesto, in the key pledges regarding a safer London, work with a Labour government to put an extra 1,300 Labour police officers and PCSOs on our streets. So there's an extra, not new ones, not like-for-like replacement, an extra. Given the spending review, is that pledge now deliverable or not?
Yes, we made that pledge. The Mayor is fully committed to supporting the Met to make sure that the front line of policing is as strong as possible. Obviously, we similarly called for flexibility in our bids, but I think all of us, from the Commissioner, myself, the Mayor, and the Home Office, have been unequivocal in recognising that what the country needs and strongly in London, what we hear all the time is that we need neighbourhood policing back in full force, and this is something that we recognise in the police and crime plan. We already saw in the last budget, which was a record 1.16 billion uplift, is that we prioritise those frontline officers, and I think that the Deputy Commissioner's talked about us not managing decline, and we know that the demand in London is significant in areas of public protection, in areas of high volume crime. We've worked with the police to make sure in the prioritisation of the allocation of unspent money from the last budget that the focus has been on that high volume crime, and it will continue to be. So we are fully committed to making sure that we have the policing teams locally that Londoners deserve.
Okay, it's not really the answer to the question I asked. I'll go back again if I may. The key pledge was we will work with the Labour government to put an extra 1,300 neighbourhood police officers and PCSOs on the streets. The question I asked, which I'll be delighted if you could answer, given that we just heard that we're going down from 43,000 to 41,000, is that pledge no longer deliverable, given the facts which we face?
I mean, we in the Mayor's office, we are fully committed to making sure that we deliver on that pledge.
But is it deliverable? You might be committed, and I appreciate that you are committed to delivering it, but I'm committed to taking the holiday on the moon next Thursday. It's not going to happen. You haven't got the money. You're losing officers. Is the pledge deliverable? Not are you committed to delivering it, is it deliverable?
I believe it is deliverable. We've seen an uplift in officers this year, both dedicated water officers and PCSOs already. As I previously mentioned, the way that we are prioritising the budget is along those lines of making sure that our neighbourhood office, our community crime fighters are the priority, because we recognise that that's what our residents and business owners want. So, yes, I believe it is deliverable, and we're going to work towards doing it.
Thank you. Another key part of the police funding is, of course, the capital situation. We believe that there are about 50% of London's police stations are at risk of closure in the next decade. And when we last spoke, we talked about how important the estate strategy was in the financial situation with which the Met is currently facing. And I asked if you'd seen the current iteration of the estate strategy, and you hadn't been able to see it then. Since we last spoke, have you had the opportunity to see the latest iteration of the estate strategy? And if so, are you confident that it will be published on time at the end of July, as was promised at one of our earlier meetings?
I have seen it now. The Mayor's Office of Police and Crime have received it. We've had a meeting in the last few weeks about the work we need to do to fully work through it, both in the Mayor's Office of Police and Crime, but actually across the GLA family, because it has implications for that. I think the Deputy Commissioner would recognise that it's a significant document in both importance and in weight. There's a lot of work to process it through. We need to make sure that it's a strategy that is affordable, future-proof, make sure that it has operational implications, and the expertise of the Met are feeding into that completely correct. So I do think that we will be able to bring it by the end of the summer. But I do think, the Deputy Commissioner might want to comment himself, but I do think we're glad to see it. We're glad that it is so extensive, but we need to make sure that it's right.
Thank you. Deputy Commissioner.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Roberts. So I won't rehearse all the detail of the challenging position on capital, but I think it's worth just framing it. But to be specific, we're targeting publication together of a strategy by the end of July. So that's our focus. Clearly, as the Deputy Mayor has described, we need to be sure it's right, and we need that strategy to take account of the outcomes of the spending review. So end of July, if all things are follow through, and if not that, then as close to as possible. a good building like this one we're in here probably needs refurbishing in 20 or 30 years' time. We've got a capital programme which would allow us to refurbish our buildings about every 120 years. So there is a significant gap in where we believe we need to be in our capital programme versus the realities of our funding today. There are several areas which pose significant challenges and a few which pose opportunities. The condition of our buildings have been a subject, obviously, of extensive conversations. We pretty much sold, to be candid, we pretty much sold what we can in terms of family silver, if that's the way you see it. You know, that is a reducing opportunity with reducing wisdom. There are some disposals we'll still consider of buildings which are in places and spaces which have become less useful to us. But we've gone from over 600 buildings to something in the region of 200, and you can't continue to reduce at that pace. We are facing into a reality that many organisations are balancing this by increasing the proportion of people working remotely. Policing doesn't work that way. 80% of our people through the pandemic were still in a conventional workplace, their conventional workplace being a custody suite or the street. And so we simply don't have the levers that are available to other organisations. So those things are challenges. One of the bigger gaps that emerges in the next period is achieving net zero goals, particularly the electrification of our vehicle fleet. So our capital programme over the next decade will have to deal with the removal of the internal combustion engine effectively from our largely from our fleet, and we currently have an unfunded proposition on that. So there is a real challenge there. The upside, if I can describe it, because this is tough, and we are talking hundreds of millions of pounds when we talk about the scope of the gap. The upside is that all organisations in the GLA family and many beyond it are experiencing the same challenge. And so we ought to be sort of driven together in this period. We ought to talk about co-location with partners, whether that's London's Fire Brigade or whether it's other local authority partners. We're determined, working with the Mayor's office, to find as many opportunities as possible to get the best from public spending by getting as many public organisations in the same buildings, particularly where we can work together effectively. And I was in one of our local areas, East London, a couple of days ago. We need to be open-minded to those possibilities. We can see that, you know, accommodating police officers with body armour, kit, radios, CS gas is not the easiest thing to do. It's not what local authorities are typically used to having to accommodate. We need to make that as workable and possible for colleagues. And then I guess we're still left with some tough choices. So we will see some disposals. They're small in number in those which are contemplated. We'll detail those in the strategy which is published that are nearest to us. But it will, I mean, I think the point was made separately about taking the public with us. We do need to describe why our emphasis, and sorry to reuse a phrase from others, but, you know, Bobby's not bricks. You know, there is a point where we need to strike the balance between maintaining buildings which have become redundant. The final thing I would say, if I may, is we're spending less on our estate than the majority of wider government. So that if we're not being profligate, and never have been. You may have seen media coverage of the condition of some of our buildings. 50% of our workforce are working in buildings we would not describe as good. I was actually very close to here, I was in Stratford Police Station last week with a dedicated group of colleagues who work on stalking. I felt pretty embarrassed by the condition of the building that they were in, doing such important work. And so we owe it to colleagues to try to find a resolution to this challenge. But the delta is substantial, and the strategy which comes forward will lay that out. We will only be able to square that circle in the very near future. You know, we can talk about what we can do over the next year or two on the condition of buildings within the affordability of presented by the SR, but we are going to be left with a big gap in the order of hundreds of millions of pounds to continue to talk to government and wider partners about.
Thank you, Beth. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Assemblymember Garbett.
Thanks. I've only got two quick questions, one for the Deputy Commissioner and then one for the Deputy Mayor. So, Deputy Commissioner, you were talking about improvements to standards, and I know from speaking to many people that until there's an independent review following the Casey review, which obviously we all know came out in March 2023 and promised a 2-year-on review. I asked the Mayor recently about what progress had been made around this review, and he said he was working with the MPS, because it's co-commissioned, to consider options for review, and I'll provide an update in due course. And that was in March. So I wondered, because obviously there's parts of the community that until there's an independent review of how things are going, are not going to feel that kind of reassurance. So I just wondered if we had a quick update on where we are with that review.
Yeah, thank you very much. So external scrutiny is, of course, incredibly important to us. I met yesterday with the lead and His Majesty's Inspector at Constabulary Fire and Rescue to talk about their work programme with us over the next period. So in the autumn of this year, they'll undertake a further integrity review. So you asked Assembly Member about standards as an issue. Those will be scrutinised in further work this autumn by our inspectorate. They are engaged in a rolling programme of activity over this summer. So whilst we determine with the Mayor and the Mayor's office what form any revisiting directly of the Casey review should take, I do want to stress that independent external scrutiny is very much live and being activated every single day. So the HMI were in our control rooms. We talked about a couple of times in our control rooms this week, looking at the quality of services being provided there. So we'd be very happy to lay out a couple of things. I think the first is the independent scrutiny, which is in flight. We're not short of scrutineers, and we can certainly share with this committee what has been undertaken in the period since the publication of Baroness Casey's review. We are still working, to get to your point and not to step around it, we are still working with the Mayor and the Mayor's office to determine the question of who and how should directly revisit the recommendations of Baroness Casey's review. I alluded to republishing or refreshing the new Met for London programme and the plan which will accompany that. That will be an important opportunity to take stock and describe our progress against recommendations made by Baroness Casey, and particularly those that were folded into the original new Met for London plan. We're committed, of course, also to working with the London Policing Board as well as working with this committee, and so we are bringing forward further scrutiny there of important issues like the culture in our specialist teams, which was a focus for Baroness Casey, and also questions which have very much occupied the London Policing Board, like those around stop search. The final thing I should just acknowledge and recognise is a really important part of our arrangements for scrutiny internal assurance is that ultimately this matters most when it makes sense to members of the community. You've alluded to that yourself. And so in the last weeks, we've agreed a programme with the Mayor's office to roll out community scrutiny across 32 boroughs. So a considerably more consistent, sustainable model of community scrutiny of policing in each of London's boroughs. So, of course, we will have totemic moments like big reviews, reports, stock takes. But what we really want to commit to is a rolling cycle of frequent exposure to community scrutiny. And I don't know whether the Deputy Mayor would want to say any more on this, but we want to prioritise, by the turn of this year, the boroughs where we know we need to do that most. We'll obviously be paying attention to the boroughs where trust and confidence in policing is lowest, and then work through to a point where in the course of next year, every borough can see a very clear pattern of community scrutiny, which is recognisable, consistent, accessible by the public.
Thank you. I really do. It's really positive to hear about the community scrutiny. But just to fully clarify, there are ongoing discussions about delivering that 2-year-on review.
There are.
Great. Thank you. And then just quickly, Deputy Commissioner, Deputy Mayor, you spoke a lot about the funding for the police, but I just wondered if you could briefly talk about what the spending review meant for MOPAC and the preventative work that is delivered. That's really important.
Yeah, I mean, similarly, we need to understand what the settlement will be. We know that some of our programmes are directly funded by the Home Office and passported through us. So we need to wait until we get that detail for us to give you more detail on it.
Do you know when you'll get that? Do you have a rough idea?
It will be in towards the autumn now.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Thanks.
Thank you. Assembly Member Lord Bailey.
There's a question for the Deputy Commissioner. Very quick question. Do you think your workforce planning is good enough? Because you have lots of asks of the Mayor and the government, and it would appear to outside forces that you were caught by surprise, the difference between what you're going to do with your uniformed officers, what you're going to do with your back office staff, how many you have on leave, how many you have on sick leave. So do you think your processes are good enough, and are you looking to the future so we don't find ourselves in this position again?
Lord Bailey, thanks very much for the question. So we're really determined to be absolutely precise about where our people are, both in their numbers and their skills, experience and talents, and to distribute that according to the needs of the service we're trying to deliver, to make sure that we've got experienced investigators alongside our inexperienced new and emerging investigators at the front end of responding to violence against women and girls, for example. The forward look is much stronger, so we have got a substantial function. We've searched for a better name for it. We haven't come up with one. We call it the engine room. It's the engine room which is driving out the organisational alignment of priorities, resources, people. And that includes the redistribution of experience. So I've just left the counter-terrorism policing world. We faced into colleagues and said, you know, we need your skills from that world to be back into local policing in some significant numbers, and we've done that. That cycle had not happened organically before, and we've had to be, and we are being very deliberate about that. Any organisation has organisational design at a point in time. I mean, one of the benefits of being as old as I am is you've seen the tight loose. You start off with a very tight organisational design. You get further away from that design over time. And it's clear that we had got further away from a deliberate organisational design. Things like the pandemic and the emergence of patterns of remote working hadn't helped us during that period. So we have first to be really clear that we're in a concerted effort through that engine room to align the organisation, priorities, the resources in terms of finance, and then the people we need to deliver our services. That is going to be stronger going forward than it was. I think we should recognise Baroness Casey identified whether all of those controls, you know, were in place as a key question in her review. The second thing I think we should acknowledge is that we have had to plan in quite a challenging environment externally for the workforce. So competing in London for people is a challenge which we have faced. We are not anticipating the same challenges with recruitment in the next period at volume. We will still, I mentioned the data scientist, we will still frankly struggle to compete to recruit some of the really niche capabilities that are contested across organisations, but we believe we can meet our recruitment targets for officers and staff at volume. And I think if your question was, you know, is workforce planning a focus for us? Will it need to be tighter in this period? Absolutely. An organisation which is smaller cannot afford to have people in jobs we don't understand and value. And inevitably, as you get further away from a deliberate design, and our predecessors had those deliberate designs at points, we had got further away from it over a period of years. There are roles which we are simply standing down now because we think they are not ones which we could value in the future. That's not to suggest the people who've been doing them are not valued, but there are these tough choices we face.
Changes. Just a police officer approached me recently, and he said he worries that the Met have a bubble coming along because he was recruited on a big drive many years ago. He's about to retire, and he says, well, everybody who came in with him will also retire. Are you planning for those sorts of things? Because if someone's to read your last comments, it would suggest that some of those things caught us by surprise. That's one thing. And the other thing is as well, how are you plugged into the rest of the civil service, because maybe you could solve some of your issues through secondments, because the civil service has high levels of expertise in many, many ways. Is your workforce plan have a conversation with the wider civil service?
Yeah, thank you, Lord Bailey. So I think responding to those 2 points, I mean, I think there will have been surprises. I mean, just to deal with your sort of characterisation direct, there will, I'm sure, have been surprises. And then there is just grinding challenge. And I think the recruitment challenge was more of a grinding challenge than a surprise. I think the post-pandemic period had some consequences. And there were quite a few people who made life choices after that. So maybe none of us could have completely anticipated that. But we're really now forecasting, I think, a different condition for next period. In terms of our relationship with wider civil service and wider colleagues, I 100% agree with you in terms of the opportunity and secondment and rotation. And I should say, actually, to the earlier questions by the Assembly member, Mr Deval, about using talented police staff, the interchange between the National Crime Agency and the Met Police, the interchange between intelligence and security organisations, all of these things need a relative workforce flexibility, which police officers and their regulations don't always bring. So in my immediately previous role, I worked with significant numbers of very talented seconded civil servants. I think it's a really important point that we should develop our workforce together. And I think that goes right through to, I was in a control room for a local authority CCTV centre a couple of days ago. You know, this also includes working with local authorities who've got enforcement officers and others working to build that community safety workforce together.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Before we continue, could I welcome the Year 12 politics students from Royal Russell School in Croydon. Hello. And thank you for joining us. So we've now come to the end of that session. It is longer than I was expecting, but I have allowed that quite simply because the questions that have been asked have been very, very important. However, that does have a repercussion in terms of time for the next set of questions. So, colleagues, please be aware of that. Please keep your questioning tight. Don't ask questions that have already been asked. And panellists, if you feel that you've answered the question, please do say, I've already answered that. And thank you very much. So the next part is our agendaed questions. And the first section in this is about the vetting process. I will start with asking you both about whether you welcome the new vetting regulations and why. So, Deputy Mayor, perhaps you could start.
Thank you, Marina, and conscious of what you just said, the answer would be definitely we welcome them. What I will say is that we, the Mayor and I, are unequivocal in our importance we put on standards in policing. We know that Londoners rightly deserve the highest standards of policing, and being able to get rid of officers that don't pass their vetting is fundamental to that. The gap in the legislation has now been closed, and we welcome that. We welcome that the police were put in an invidious situation that they had to try and work through, and that's now been tested. I don't agree in the manner that that was tested, but what I do think is that now that loophole has been closed, and that will give us greater strength in improving the standards in policing. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner.
Thanks very much, Chair. We absolutely welcome the change in regulations which has been brought forward. The last years have seen the strongest doubling down on police standards for decades in the Met. The Commissioner, my predecessor, took the step to be active and deliberate about pursuing those who we felt could no longer serve, at least a couple of hundred officers coming into scope for that work. And we fully intend to, when they're sitting alongside new guidance, use these regulations to continue that work.
Thank you. Do you think they go far, the new regulations actually go far enough to dismiss officers that pose a danger to the public? Deputy Commissioner.
Thank you, Chair. So we've had 5 asks, effectively, of government, and we think we're 4 out of 5 of the way to succeeding just to be clear. And these regulations are, at their headline, the ones we had wanted to see. Guidance is yet to be published. We are institutionally, between government and policing, not famous for lean processes that buck bureaucracy. There'll need to be processes which stand scrutiny, have appropriate channels to ensure that they're fair, proportionate, all of those things. So do they go far enough? We think yes, most of the way. I'll just illuminate where we continue to have some interest. Will they be nimble enough, slick enough? Will they do a job so we can actually, frankly, exit officers who shouldn't be in the organisation and not continue paying them, which is the grievous bit, that we end up with people who we have no choice other than to pay for longer periods. That remains to be seen in the way the guidance comes forward, and clearly we're working with government closely with the Home Office to try to produce that effect. There are 4 out of 5, as I've alluded to. I think it would just help, having said that to the committee, I ought to say what they were. We wanted to see regulations that tackle legacy, so you could deal with behaviour that went before the new regulations, not just after it. Otherwise, frankly, what are we doing with 200 people who we're already concerned about? We wanted regulations that would allow us to join up dots, so we weren't looking at individual events that might impact on our confidence in officers, but we could look at a series of events and connect those dots up to group together. I mean, frankly, if you've got a single misconduct or gross misconduct allegation, that's proven. You can exit officers on that. We needed to be able to join the dots of multiple allegations, sometimes not proved to that standard. We wanted a streamlined process. We think we are underway in delivering that to get there. My third point, we wanted these to be in place by spring. We are there, waiting for the guidance. The final thing, the fifth thing we would like to do more on is to see the opportunity to use sensitive information and intelligence that can't be directly disclosed in public processes in vetting considerations. So that is the area we still need to work at. Clearly, on occasions we hold, for example, intelligence related to corruption, which can't always be used in completely open processes. But frankly, we can't not know it. And therefore, we want to find a way of constructing a process for vetting assurance and vetting removal, which allows us to deal with sensitive information and bring that to bear in a way which is, can be audited, can be seen as fair. So we're really positive about the progress that has been made for all of those, and it is particularly women who've been affected by the behaviour of, and it is particularly men who are in those cohorts. We are sorry it has taken this time. We're sorry that these cases have been dragged into courts to resolve these questions. We think what we're doing is palpably in the public interest, and the court had found that regulations needed to change. We're grateful for the changes which are coming forward.
Thank you. And if you're waiting for guidance, does that mean that the regulations haven't been used yet?
Yeah, just to be clear, Chair, thank you. Yeah, we have paused on using the regulations directly until the guidance has been issued. We have had our experience over the last years of trying to frame that for ourselves and been challenged, obviously, in the courts. So for the sake of the few months we hope it will have taken between the regulations becoming available and guidance being published, we have paused. We clearly want to be in a position where before the summer, before parliamentary recess, we've got the guidance and regulations alongside each other so we can start moving through the casework.
Thank you. You answered my next question, which is when are you expecting? Thank you for that, Deputy Commissioner. Assembly Member Cooper.
Thank you very much, Chair. So how is the Met? Let's assume that the guidance is out, the new regulations are in place and the guidance is out. How will the Met ensure that going forward an officer who is found unsuitable for a role in the Met is going to have their vetting withdrawn promptly?
Thank you very much. Well, as I say, the first focus is officers who are already in our scope. So we have got in the region of 200, it's about 197 officers who are already in scope. Some of those have had appeals, some have had vetting already withdrawn. A significant number resigned in flight in this process. We expect that that will continue to be one route by which people leave. But we have grown the against the prevailing conditions in terms of resources. We've grown the capacity to do this work. So probably worth a snapshot, of three numbers. We put over 500 people into neighbourhood teams, despite the constraints. We put over 500 people into public protection, tackling rape, sexual violence, violence against women and girls. And we put in the region of 240 people into our professional standards teams to make sure that the timeliness of investigations and vetting processes moves through. We also need to do even more in the space of automation and in the space of tooling like artificial intelligence and social media scraping. So we have got quite a few people responses. We can put people in place to make these processes move quickly, but we actually also recognise that in today's age, quite a lot of what will shine a light on people's personal conduct and values is also digital. And so we are keen to connect up the data we hold already and also particularly at point of recruitment and then of revetting to make sure we fully understand people's online lives as far as we can, balancing reasonable expectations of privacy with expectations that you uphold standards and values. So we're investing people, technology, focus. We do not want this group of we do not want a group of officers who we believe should exit the service hanging around.
Yeah, and the Commissioner has made that very clear. He was with us in February, and at our 12th February meeting, he confirmed, however, that the Met is still, and I'm quoting from him, spending millions of pounds on the current people who are on paid leave at home, and the bill for them would run at about $7 million a year. Now, obviously, we're pretty keen that the Met, and particularly given we've just been talking about tough choices and, a tough settlement from the comprehensive spending review, we've just been talking about that at some length. We don't really want £7 million spent on people who failed their vetting. We'd rather that £7 million was available for something else. So I think we're very keen to see where the vetting has been withdrawn, that people are off the payroll as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
Whilst obviously, due process. And,
yeah, I mean, we certainly share that ambition.
Yeah.
It's true for all misconduct processes, I say. And to give a flip side to this, because I think it's important that to recognise that we also need to support good officers and staff who are in these processes of both vetting, but also processes of complaint investigation and so on. So we need them to, if they can be and should be exonerated, we need them to feel the processes are moving at pace so that they can be back out doing their important work, because it's very so.
Couldn't agree more. I mean, exonerating people quickly is as important as shuffling them quickly towards the door and getting them off the payroll, but also for other officers who are working alongside colleagues who are, potentially, should be shuffled towards the door, pretty smartish. It's also not nice for them to have to work with people like that, is it?
No, I mean, it's worth saying we've had to restrict the duties, contact with the public and contact with other officers of many of these individuals, and that's a deeply unsatisfactory situation to be in, that we've got people in the workforce who we feel we can't expose colleagues to and have had to have things like special vetting leave and others which the Commissioner has spoken to, and I know those numbers of millions which will shift over time in terms of precisely what that number is as people come in and out of that group, but it is not where we want to spend money, and we as I say, we don't either want to be spending money on excessively long investigations that don't serve complainants, don't serve victims, don't serve the public. So we need to do that fairly. We need to do it on an evidence basis. But we need to be expeditious in ways which past processes haven't proved to be. So I think this is fierce agreement, Assembly Member. I think on this point, we can, I think, over time in these sessions bring back updates on that. So whether it's myself or one of the assistant commissioners, I'm sure that later in the year, after we've had the chance to see the regulations take their effect, perhaps towards the close of the year, we'd be in a position to talk about what has changed in that time.
I wouldn't usually take the opportunity to speak on behalf of the whole of the committee, but I think I can say that would be extremely welcome if you were able to update us as this moves forward at a future meeting or ongoing at future meetings. Just in the specific case of Sergeant Di Maria, who was actually moved to working in forensics, so presumably had no contact with members of the public in that kind of role. I just wondered what specific lessons have been learnt from that case, without touching on the legal situation that we're in at the moment in any size, shape or form. What lessons have we learnt from that case?
Yeah, thank you very much. So I'll aim off the specifics of the case, not least of which we are appealing the outcome from the High Court. So this is sort of in-flight work as well. I'll aim off the specifics of the officer. But what I would say in general is it's important to double down on the point I've already made about connecting the dots. So we have had a review of hundreds of cases under an operation called Onyx, which has looked at those who have come to light previously for allegations of violence against women and girls and sexual offences. What we see in a cohort of individuals is that there have been a series of what to a criminal standard or to a standard in a misconduct process might have been unproven, but which are signals of recurring allegations, behaviour of the same type and character, which tend to reinforce the validity of the original allegations. So this is, of course, something we do in our wider criminal casework now. In the past, the prosecution of violence against women and girls used to rely solely on statements of victims, but courageous victims now stand alongside each other as we identify the same behaviour as recurred in a number of cases, or find evidence on devices and do those other things which I've alluded to. So I think that, as I say, if I can, I'll position this to one side of the specific case, but I think the joining the dots is clearly one of the important measures. For many of the committee, I don't think this will be a surprise, and I'm not about to mansplain misogyny to anybody here. But the behaviours which
I wouldn't try. Quite a few of us are women on this committee. So
exactly, Assembly Member.
Badly.
I'm really going to aim off that. But I think what I wanted to stress is that we are seeing more and more recognition of the signals of those attitudes being identified, more early identification of misogynistic attitudes being called out and challenged and recognised. Colleagues with courage bringing that forward, male and female, so male allies and women, both calling out misogynistic behaviour. So a combination of joining the dots but earlier identification of problematic behaviour, I think, is an important mechanism for us. And as I say, I think as far as I would go is that in instances previously and in other organisations when we've dismissed officers who've behaved in these ways, it is generally not a surprise to many women who have been around them in the past. And I think that is something which we need to see as a signal that there must have been earlier opportunities in some of those cases to get a hold of that conduct and deal with it at an earlier stage.
Sure. Well, I like to think that we've moved on a little bit from the average statistic that showed that people ringing up about a domestic violence situation took 33 calls before it got really taken seriously or much was dealt with. And I also like to think that having more women at senior officer levels in the police will start to make identifying those behaviours that lead on particularly to other things more apparent. I certainly found it quite difficult to have that kind of conversation with one of my borough commanders, not the current one, who she herself had been subject to violence by her police officer husband, and it hadn't, in my view, from what she said, and I know that she's spoken about this a lot publicly, so I'm not disclosing a private conversation, as it were, I don't think it had been dealt with as swiftly as one might have hoped. So hopefully we are moving on from, finding, a borough commander who had been finding difficulty in getting police to deal with the situation. That then means to me that members of the public are in the same situation. However, my final question to you before we move on to other colleagues is, do you think there are any other legislative barriers in the way of implementing any of the other recommendations that sprang from the Baroness Louise Casey review? Do you think there's anything else that we need to do? And actually, I'd like to put that to both of you, so I don't know whether there's anything that you would like to add to that, Deputy Mayor.
Sure, thank you. You'll know that the Mayor worked closely with Baroness Harriet Harman to put forward legislation around this area, so we can be very specific on what we welcome and what we feel is still outstanding. So now in law, which we welcome, is providing Chief Constables the right to appeal to police appeal tribunals following misconduct hearing when they conclude the sanction is inadequate. We also welcome the changing policing regulations to ensure that failure to maintain or achieve vetting status is a ground for removal. However, we feel that we still need to make sure that enabling the Met and other forces with clear legal powers to reopen misconduct investigations that were closed. And I wonder if that goes to Matt's previous point about joining the dots. And we also want to introduce a managed severance process to allow officers to exit from the service and ensure that we have the service and skills that is needed. And that goes to Matt's point earlier about, the future shape of the organisation. And then, which is something I do personally, sign off pension forfeitures. I think it's a really, find what you find interesting, but I think it's a very fascinating loophole that currently pension forfeitures only apply in around offences that have been committed in connection with an officer's service in order for them to lose their pensions. And to your point previously, Assemblyman Cooper, if you're the victim of domestic abuse and your husband is a police officer, when is he in service? Yeah. And does he deserve a pension if he's been found to be abusive to you? So that's something that I, as someone who signs off those forfeitures, it's something that we'd like to push for stronger legislation.
So can you just clarify for me then? Let's use the example of Wayne Couzens, who we all know. Does that mean if he was off duty when he did everything that he did, that he would not have been subject to a pension forfeiture?
It's a very grey area. Wow. So what we have to do is try and work out where the line is. Obviously we know in the case of Wayne Couzens is that he used his warrant card, so that's very clear. But it is something that is constantly the team are trying to work out how we can think about the connection, and I think it needs sorting and clarifying because of the standards we expect.
I think those are three really interesting examples that you've given there. And, of course, it's interesting also to hear the name of Harriet Harman, who has also been subject to endless misogyny, not least calling her Harriet Harperson endlessly over the years, which was unbelievably tedious. Did you want to add anything to the three examples? Yeah,
Assembly Member, thank you very much. So if I could just reinforce the point that police-perpetrated domestic abuse and sexual violence is clearly particularly invidious because those abusive men exploit the power they have as police officers. We consistently see evidence of, don't report me because it's my mates, don't report me because I understand the system. And that's actually tragically true, as you've alluded to, even for victims who are in service themselves. And it's possibly even more true for victims outside the service who feel and suspect that there'll be interference with investigations. So to the point the Deputy Mayor has made, understanding where the boundaries are in terms of when somebody is using their police status and powers to perpetrate abuse is something we want to be very open to exploring the boundaries of that, and very bold. And I'll come back to 2 points then that I'd like to add to the list of 3. The first of those is that we would like a expeditious process to apply to volunteer special constables. So at the moment, they are effectively subject to a version of the same regulations as officers. We think that there is a proportionate way of dealing with volunteers. Clearly, somebody with a warrant card, whether they are being paid or not, can engage in the kind of coercive behaviour that I've described. So we need a regime that deals with special constables, and we think we could do that in a way which would allow us to part company, your phrasing earlier, to move people to the door who are volunteers and might have abused that position, to do that quicker. The second thing, which will need care and will need to have safeguards, I'm sure, is that we'd like to explore, in a similar vein, the boundaries of the regulation of investigatory powers. So at present, public bodies can carry out surveillance on individuals in pursuit of criminal investigations, effectively. We do not have the same powers through the regulation of investigatory powers attached to gross misconduct by police officers and indeed by staff. So we are keen to continue to explore how we can be equipped with the powers to carry out covert investigations into officers. Clearly, when they move into the space of criminal conduct, we activate the powers which flow from the law which is there to deal with that. But we think there is potentially a gap, in the same way that the Deputy Mayor was talking about grey areas. We don't want to lose evidence by not using the right powers. And so we want to continue to talk about that. Clearly, officers have to be afforded due process. A number of people on the committee have alluded to that, but we think there is scope in the space of covert investigations to feel more confident that legislation is supporting that. And then the final point, which kindly you also acknowledged, is that we need to support accountability for everybody in the round, including for good officers and including for victims, complainants who often want candour and explanation, as well as to see some kind of sanction or outcome. Quite often what people are seeking is clarity, explanation, and at points expressions of contrition, rather than necessarily, seeing people dismissed. I'm expanding that because an area which is still in flight is the accountability review, a piece of work which is still very much, we know, in focus for government. So we want to find ways of supporting officers. We're really positive that anonymity for armed officers in criminal processes has been committed to, but there are other areas where we'd like to see adjustments to make sure that there isn't unnecessary double jeopardy for officers. Processes move quickly. They feel that they're fair for officers. So the accountability, I'm catching the chair's eye, who has got a piece of paper in her hand and looks like she'd like to move on.
I was about to say, I think the chair will want us to move on.
I just want to acknowledge that the accountability review is an important part of the policy response to give good officers confidence to do their work, and confidence that we will remove their poor colleagues from the workforce.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Assemblymember Garbett.
Thank you. In the briefing Shifting Culture from the Criminal Justice Alliance and the National Black Police Association, they concluded that the Met's action have not lived up to the words of the Commissioner's letter in implementing Casey's interim report on the misconduct system. And we know that there's disproportionality within the misconduct process impacting black officers. So I just wondered what work's going in to ensure that changes to the vetting system aren't going to disproportionately affect black officers.
Yeah, thank you very much, Assembly Member. So there's an important wider conversation ongoing to ensure that we understand where any apparent disproportionality arises across the misconduct system. And that's true against these new vetting regulations. So the equality impact of the new regulations and the way they're enacted is something which is very much in view. It's a priority for us to ensure that they feel like they are supportive of the whole workforce, the good officers and staff who should be supported, and of communities who need that. So we will be tracking the demographics of those who move through these processes. If there is apparent disproportionality, we will want to understand it. You can speculate on why that might arise, and we can speculate on why it might occur in individual cases. But it's an important question, and one which we're absolutely going to keep in view.
Thank you. Have you seen the shifting? Did you see the shifting culture report? It came out in October 2024. Did you see it?
Assembly Member, I'm not sure that I have directly seen that report.
Okay, just because it also talks about kind of the entrenched racism and people not feeling like their black officers not feeling like progress has been made since Casey. So it would be interesting to hear how quickly this wider work on the misconduct system is going to take place, and when you think that disproportionality will be worked out.
Yeah, thank you. I'd be pleased. I mean, if I can just acknowledge that I'm sure there are colleagues who've been closer to that work than I've been because of the nature of my role in the last years. But I know that work is underway. I'm sure we can commit to let this committee know when a cogent update on, particularly on the vetting regulations, should come forward. My sense is by the end of the year we should be able to bring to this committee a picture of how the regulations are being enacted and their effect. We know that, we should be very transparent. There is disproportionality across a whole range of public systems, and therefore we know we need to pay attention to that in the vetting process to understand it. There are theories as to why disproportionality might occur. Some of them will stand up, some of them will fall down, I think, in the process of doing that work, but it's important we do track it through.
Yeah, and just stress the urgency of that. But yeah, we'd really welcome any more information about that misconduct review and, through the vetting. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. We are going to move on to our next section, but partway through that, I will call for a break. Our next session is about the London Drugs Commission report and drug use. First question is Assembly Member Hall.
Right, okay, so I think I'll start with the Deputy Mayor. So which key findings from the London Drugs Commission report on cannabis in London did you welcome most and intend to act on?
Thank you, Assembly Member Hall. The Drugs Commission has 42 recommendations.
Yep.
Those recommendations are for a myriad of partners, including health partners, education partners, police and ourselves. We're working through those. In terms of governance, we're working through the best place to look at those recommendations. We haven't had a meeting since the publication of the London Drugs Forum, so the next meeting is something that's where we will start to look at how best to move forward on the recommendations.
Okay, but you're the Deputy Mayor, so when you looked at these, which you will have done, because I'm sure we've all read it, which one did you think, that's great, I hope that we enact that, I hope we put that to practice? What did you think?
I think for me personally, I think it's really important that we get the things around education. I also thought that the research that Dr. Emily Finch, who sits on the London Drugs Forum with us, contributed to on the level of addiction and psychosis in prolonged cannabis use was important, but I also thought, moreover, that the recommendations about taking a harm approach are really important, and that we have a system that looks at how we reduce harm to individuals and communities, and that we work as a system to make sure that that's the case, and that we focus on, in the drugs economy, as the Deputy alluded to earlier, that we are focused on the suppliers and the organised criminals and dealers and exploiters in that system.
Okay, I'm not sure that you needed a drugs commission to to point that out, but nevertheless, what key message from the report would you challenge?
Which key message?
I mean, I looked at it and clearly I was not happy about an awful lot of it. But what really struck you? What did you look at and think, good Lord, no?
I don't know that. I mean, I think with 42 recommendations, I don't think that. I think what I would say is there's a lot to digest. I don't think it was clear that one way or the other. But also, I'm really conscious that it's a review of the kind of current situation and how those partners might work together. But obviously, as well, the recommendations work across government and other partners to think through.
Yeah, I know. But did you not look at any of them and think, good Lord, no? Were you quite? I know there's 42, so there's an awful lot for you to choose from what you might not like. So, were there any of them that you didn't think were appropriate?
No. I mean, I think I slightly am concerned about for a normal person and for a normal police officer, the demarcation between synthetic and natural cannabis would be a hard thing.
Absolutely.
To know, I suppose, but there are wider conversations that we've had in the London Drugs Forum about drug testing, and so I get that there's definitely complexity to the recommendations, but that's why we want to work through them in the London Drugs Forum.
Also, I guess, how much would somebody use for personal use or not? But anyway, let me ask these same two questions then to Matt. Which key findings from the London Drugs Commission report on cannabis in London do you welcome and intend to act on? And what were there any, like me, that you look at them and think, good God, that wouldn't work, or that would be a challenge in your language, which is slightly different from mine? What give me the two extremes, if you would.
Thank you, Assembly Member, Deputy Chair. So it's to sort of stand on the same point that the Deputy Mayor did. It's a comprehensive report. I think in this case it's 300 pages. There's a great deal relied on there in terms of international comparisons and academic work. So forums like the London Drugs Forum need to respond to that in a way which is analytical and thoughtful, which I think the report will require. There are recommendations about understanding public health and individual health consequences, which I think are welcome. There are recommendations about earlier and more credible education interventions, which I think are clearly welcome. There are recommendations about monitoring the international picture, which, we are clearly in a world where the experience globally will inform practice and policy here. So those things we would recognise as being areas for continued work, as well as the focus on individual diversion. The recommendation which points to legal status is one which we have not, as a service, called for. The question of decriminalisation is not one as a service we have called for, but I will repeat comments that the Commissioner has made prior to this committee. They are questions for Parliament in weighing social harm, individual harm, community impact. Those questions have to be weighed by Parliament in its work. Excuse me. And therefore, we'll wait to see what the wider response to the report is. There is a strong emphasis in the report. I'm not reacting quite in the way you described on this point, Deputy Chair, but I would react to the extensive commentary on stop and search and say that clearly this report is a vehicle for a lot of concern around the use of stop search, its fairness and proportionality. And I think it's possible to separate some of those issues from the questions which are addressed around substance misuse in the wider report. So we are serious about the Stop Search Charter, which we've published, about continuing to work with communities to demonstrate that stop and search is an important tool for reducing violence in particular, and that the 300 weapons we take off the streets of London every month through Stop Search are an important part of safeguarding communities. We need to keep in view in all of this that a good deal of the violence we see, depending on its severity, somewhere between 30 and 60%, according to different examination. The violence we see in the streets of London, much of it is related to substance misuse, and a good deal of it to the supply and trafficking of drugs. So we need to keep in view that and the antisocial behaviour that flows from those behaviours as well. And the people who will moderate that in the end and work out what balance to strike between enforcement and public health approaches should be Parliament, and therefore we'll wait to see what the wider reaction is. We've obviously seen some reaction to that, and you've heard there some of our perspective.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor, the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners note that decriminalising cannabis would continue to be supplied by drug markets that are run by criminals, bring violence and antisocial behaviour to our communities, and exploit the vulnerable, including children and young people. Do you agree with the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners?
I fully agree that we need to tackle the suppliers and dealers and exploiters of children, yes.
That's not quite the question, but I'm mindful of time, and I'll give way to, I think Lord Bailey was coming on.
Actually, it's a thank you, Assembly Member Hall. It is actually Assembly Member Garbutt first, then Lord Bailey after. My apologies. Thank you, Assembly Member Hall. Assembly Member Lord Bailey.
Good morning. Deputy Mayor, are you not concerned about the disproportional effect that decriminalisation could have on the poorest communities in London?
Can you clarify?
So, for instance, it's the poorest communities in London that suffer the most violence. As you've heard from the Deputy Commissioner, much of the violence in London is generated by drug activity. So aren't you concerned that a relaxing of drug law or decriminalisation, to use your term, would lead to a massive impact in that community?
I think that the recommendations actually say that the change wouldn't. It's about possession. It's about a small measure of possession of natural cannabis, changing class. It's not about decriminalising the supply of cannabis or the dealing of cannabis. Moreover, it doesn't suggest.
I said about the use, and let me be more specific. You don't seem to understand. In those poorer communities, they suffer more from crime and drug use. Are you not concerned that a decriminalisation of natural cannabis, as you call it, will not have a disproportionate negative effect on those communities, i.e. they will use more drugs and more drugs will be supplied to that community, and with that supply will come violence, and with that use of more drugs will come higher levels of psychosis? Are you not concerned about that?
From the report, it actually shows that the decriminalisation has had using international comparators, so that as a caveat, it shows that there has been no marked increase. There's people who are not currently using cannabis do not tend to take up it because of the change in legislation. And as I previously said, I think that the recommendations are helpful in focusing on our efforts on harm reduction and making sure that we have the right services around education and drug support, but also that the police can be able to focus on those suppliers and those dealers of drugs to reduce the exact harm that you're concerned about.
For me, they're two separate things, the users and the suppliers. And there's no evidence internationally that legalising decriminalising, to use your term, leads to less criminal activities. I don't know if you've ever met a criminal gang. They're not concerned what we're talking about in this room. What they're concerned about is users. And if this in any way increases the size of their market, they will respond to that in kind. They'll supply more drugs. They'll supply more violence with those drugs. And you truly believe that changing the law in this way will have no impact, it will have no upward swing on the amount of people use drugs, despite the fact that many other international studies have shown that decriminalising leads to greater use. There's a study carried out in this country by one of the think tanks where over 1 million young people said, yes, if it was legal, they would try it. Are you not concerned that we are taking a risk for these poorer communities?
Your mic, please, Deputy Mayor. Is it not working?
You're cursed. It's every time.
just grab one of those ones.
Okay, another one's coming to you. Sorry about this. It did happen before as well, didn't it? Yeah.
As long as it's not cannabis.
I can promise you it's not. That we're talking about the London Drugs Commission, and the London Drugs Commission recommendations and research talks about studies that show that there is no evidence of a significant increase. That doesn't, obviously, there are many other studies, and that's, partly the difficulty of research, isn't it? Is that there's counter narratives and things that can be used in here. But in the context of the report that we're discussing today, that's the evidence that's put forward. I think it's also really important that we're talking about the other recommendations, which are also important, about making sure there's good education around drugs, that is, well informed, good education. So when you talk about young people saying they'll try it, well, where is the intervention that says, okay, but do you know X, Y, Z facts about this? And the work, as I previously mentioned, of Dr. Finch speaks to those exact things, and people should be very aware of the harms that are.
There's two things I say. The problem I have with the Drugs Commission, it is very weighted heavily to people who are pro relaxation. I'm sorry, it's my opinion, Zoe. I don't want to hear what you've got to say. You can speak in your time. Secondly, and secondly, a lot of these international comparisons seem to have missed out the studies in Portugal, in parts of the United States, where young people did use more. And the reason I ask this, because I come from the community that is the most affected by drug use. We have terrible, absolutely catastrophic mental health outcomes because of high use of cannabis, and my community unfortunately is involved in a lot of the gang violence that is generated by this. So when you have all these reports, have they been to these communities and asked these young people what they think the effect will be, rather than just the usual suspects or people who will support their argument?
Thank you, Lord Bailey. Yes, I'm assured that the Commission went out to many community organisations and talked to a breadth of people. The driving scope of the research was how can we look at how we reduce harm around this very question. So yes, and as I've talked about before, the very work of the work of Emily Finch shows, and then the report says the exact same thing that you're saying, that prolonged use and addiction is recognised in cannabis use and can lead to psychosis. And we need a system that works similarly to the work I think we'll be going on to talk about around Operation Adder, that looks about how we can make sure that the right interventions around substance abuse are there.
But surely reduced access is reduced harm. I find it astonishing that this has come up with the idea that young people don't know there is some risk in smoking cannabis. People do know that and still do it quite a bit. So why do we think that this... And by the way, I used to work for a very, very big drug program based in London. I used to specialise in cannabis. I used to specialise in cannabis. And we've been educating young people for years in this country about drugs, and they still continue to take them. So why do you think that a little bit of education is going to offset the impact that the decriminalisation will have?
I'm sure you know, as you've read the report, Lord Bailey, that that's not what we're saying. We're not saying that the report doesn't say a little bit of education. It says the right kinds of education, the right kinds of intervention that does exactly what you speak to. And I know that as a previous youth worker, you know the power of the right interventions and making sure that those communications to young people are in a way that relates to where they are in period. And we see that all the time with the work that we commission. The most effective work that we commission are the ones around young people that get that communication right.
What I'm suggesting is, as a formal...
Assemblymember Bailey, I think we have exhausted this now. Assemblymember Hall, would you like to continue with your questioning?
Yeah, Deputy Mayor, you brought up a very good point. How do you tell the difference between natural and synthetic? I mean, perhaps people know, I have literally no idea, but that's something that we'll be asking our police officers to look at. I mean, the other thing is, how will officers differentiate between those buying bulk amounts for personal use and those buying bulk amounts for supply? How are the police going to tell that?
I mean, I think we need to be conscious that the research makes these recommendations, and the implementation, especially around the change of legislation, is with government. So I'm conscious that we're talking about things that are very much in the hypothetical sphere right now. But I do think, and as I acknowledged before, I think it's important, but it's also important about what the research showed, that synthetic cannabis can be a lot stronger than natural cannabis, and therefore, talking to the conversation we just had, the harms can be greater. And so in thinking, if we were to be moving into that space, how do we enable that system around, I suppose, testing or other things? But I'm sure that we'd have to be really careful about how we think about
microphone. Your microphone.
The mic. Could you press it again, please, Deputy? No.
You're destroying our microphone system, Deputy Mayor.
So we have a third one that's coming to you. Apologies, Deputy Mayor. Please continue.
Sorry.
No, you've lost your thread, and I'm not surprised. I accept that, but what I don't accept is the fact that we're looking at far fewer police officers. We're now I think you spent $250,000 on this drugs commission, and we're looking at things that are going to take the police even more time, put even more complexities, and give them even more issues. I think a lot of this is around wanting to stop and search more and more, which many of us would be very against. But I put the question to you. How will they know what is for personal use, or whether they're buying in bulk for personal use or in bulk to actually sell? It's another complexity you're asking our police in their fewer and fewer numbers to deal with.
Thank you for reiterating the question. I think that it's important to know, to think about a couple of things. I suppose in looking across the recommendations, the refocusing on not, if the legislation to change, what would be the balance between not the police not having to do as much in this space, but be able to have the focus higher up in the chain around suppliers and dealers. But also, I think also we know that currently the legislation does demark between possession and supply, and so there is a system. But I'm once again very conscious of the fact that we're talking very much in hypotheticals here, and that we would have to get experts, lawyers, all kinds of partners around the table if that was a place that we were in, but we're really not.
Okay, I'm just mindful that you spent so much money on that. I'd rather the money had gone into the police service, quite frankly. Matt, will there be a weight limit, do you think, that you could say for personal use? I mean, hypothetically, I mean, it's something you're going to have to think about since it's being talked about. What would you say was for personal use, and how is a police officer going to?
So I think those are questions we already wrestle now. Colleagues wrestle by degrees. I wouldn't want to dive into an area which there are very specific experts who give evidence at that point. I think the way we tend to prove supply offences, for example, is both the combination of the physical evidence and then questions like communications and the WhatsApp messages, text messages, etc., which form the background for a pattern. So I think I would be reluctant to be as specific to put a number of grams to it. I think Assembly Member is probably my conclusion.
Okay. Do you want me to stop for the others to come in, or shall I finish my last one?
Would you mind if we moved on, Assembly Member Hall?
Well, can I just ask then, will the Mayor publish a full response to the recommendations set out in the report? That's my last question.
I think he sent out a statement on the back of the report.
Well, just confirm to me. Would he publish a full response to the whole thing?
I mean, we'll be working through we can't really, because as I've previously said, there's recommendations around all different agencies. So, but as I said previously, we will be working through the recommendations in the London Drugs Forum, and he did do a statement after its release.
Thank you. Assembly Member Garbett.
Thank you. I'm very glad that the report's finally published. I know we've been waiting a long time for it. And I just wanted to set out that obviously we're talking about that the government did push back on the decriminalisation, which is different to legally regulating. Decriminalisation is obviously completely different to a legally regulated model, which would be around legal access to supply, age limits, and more kind of a harm reduction approach. So, yeah, they are very different things, decriminalising and legally regulating. But I want to really focus on what difference it will make to Londoners today, because there are obviously some recommendations for the police on the way, conduct and the way things happen. So there is a recommendation about changing the law on the smell of cannabis alone, not justifying a stop and search. But obviously that was recommended by the IOPC and has been recommended by other bodies too. So I just wondered how this is going to make a difference this time. So I guess this is to you, Matt, to just, are you going to listen, and what difference is going to be made this time?
Thank you very much, Assembly Member. Can I just take one step back into the operational realities of policing this phenomenon and acknowledge that already we have a very graduated response to individuals. So our focus is on tackling the violence associated with criminal markets. The number of offences we've recorded, people we've pursued for individual simple possession has reduced over the last years, certainly the years since 2022, the priority being to have people move into treatment, referral, diversion, and the number of people we've pursued for their involvement in illicit markets, supply, trafficking has increased. So the reality of law enforcement in this space is that our focus is plainly on tackling the criminal markets and the associated violence. So that's the first thing to acknowledge. When we encounter, and I'll definitely come to your question about the very specific, when we encounter individuals in possession, I think it's important to just, the report does this, but I think we should bring it forward that already we have this graduated response. It is in effect a three strikes mechanism for adults, so community resolution, potentially a fixed penalty notice, a penalty notice for disorder, and then the prospect of a charge after that. So already we have a very graduated harm reduction approach to individuals. And of course, as I've pointed to the fact, we also need to think about criminal exploitation and think about wider community harm, including antisocial behaviour. But I didn't want to leave the committee with the sense that a central plank of our strategy was to pursue individual users. The central plank of our strategy is to go after those who are criminally exploiting children. And as is recognised, it's not entirely clear how decriminalisation will remove some of those risks. To your point, so that I am focused on your question, Assembly Member, I think my colleague, Deputy Assistant Commissioner Adeleke and Adi gave evidence to this committee, or a version of it in June, to be clear that our operational position is that the smell of cannabis alone is not sufficient grounds to initiate a stop search. That is the guidance which goes out to officers. I am got a very fixed view on whether a change in the law could do a good job of making that even clearer. It is quite hard to legislate for the different factors which lead to the potential to carry out a stop search. But the guidance we are giving officers now is that we certainly expect that additional ground should be found. And we, of course, have wider concerns. We haven't talked about driving, for example, but people who are, on the roads consuming drugs, posing a risk to themselves and others. So there are wider additional factors we would expect to see. We can work this through with government and with the London Drugs Forum, the question of whether additional guidance is necessary to that point, and indeed whether legislation would reinforce it. But I want to be very clear and to reinforce the evidence that Adi Adeleke gave.
Yeah, and I think the point I'm making is just, it's very much that if it's already practice, how is it going to make a difference if it's still being found to be an issue that people are stopped based on the smell? I think, and I do get your points around people harm reduction, which we do come on to later around kind of some of those. But yeah, it's specifically about how it's going to make a difference, because I think this links to, and I know you talked about people being pursued for crime, but I'm very much focused on people being stopped and searched in the first place. And the report really talks about that disproportionality of black people being kind of 3 times more likely to be stopped and searched. So we've known that for years. The Colour of Injustice report in 2018 showed a disparity. So again, I wonder why, do you feel like this finding is going to make a difference? What is it actually going to change in operational delivery for the Met?
So there are, we're about to go into a summer focused activity. We always see seasonal peaks in crime. The focus we are injecting to officers to reduce, harm in communities from violence, from retail crime, from antisocial behaviour, things we know which are undermining a sense of safety. So being very clear about what we are strategically intending is important. And yes, we want to see the 10% increase in arrests that I've described. But we want to see them against crimes of violence, crimes that affect neighbourhoods. That's where our focus is. So I think the direction we give can make a difference. I think I'm not sure I should lean too hard into your point about whether the recommendation is good or bad, because we need to continue to consider that. But I don't think this recommendation alone would change that balance and the disproportionality that you've described. Other things can and would. We know that tragically the victimisation in crimes of violence falls disproportionately on communities in London. We know that deprivation, as Lord Bailey has described, falls disproportionately on communities in London, and crime will often follow. I want to step back, if I may, I want to step back from the individual recommendations of the report, but look at one cluster of recommendations, which is around stop search, and say I think that this report might tend to, at points, conflate the experience of stop search with the issue of substance misuse and individual harm. And that actually what is important to us is that we acknowledge that for at least 40 years and probably longer, stop search has been part of the framing of the Met's relationship with black communities. That there is no doubt that there has been protection of communities through the use of effective stop search, but also harm done to communities and individuals, and certainly the relationship. We have been working hard on the stop search charter to focus on the quality of the encounter, supervision, scrutiny, the use of body-worn video, all of these things which I know have been expanded on here, Assembly Member, before.
Yeah, so I just want to go back to a specific
I think those are more important than this individual recommendation.
But this is, so I'm speaking to a specific line in the report that says that black Londoners were still 3.3 times more likely to be stopped and searched by the MPS for any reason, and 3.1 times more likely to be subject to a drug-related stop and search than white Londoners. And the report talks about the fact that there's an equal use of cannabis between black and white Londoners. So it's specifically that point, that we still got that huge disproportionality, 3 times 3 more likely to be stopped and searched. And that's really, that's the bit that I'm speaking to rather than a recommendation. It's like, well, what did the Met think about that and what are you going to do to address it?
I mean, I'll just reiterate the fact that the direction we're giving and our intention is to use stop search principally to reduce violence and principally to tackle the criminal markets which are underpinned by that violence. And our focus is going to remain there. We're going to keep coming back to the London Policing Board and this committee, I'm sure, to talk about where disproportionality arises, the reasons why that might happen, and our commitment to ensure that stop search is used in a way which is fair, focused, proportionate, and the quality of the encounter is respectful.
So I guess my question is, do you feel like this report told you anything new? Because I guess there's a whole list in there that's like clarity on how stop and search is used, ensure the powers are used fairly, understand police practices, improve police community relationships. And I think from what you've just said there and what you've said at the top, I think you'd probably say you were doing all of that. So I guess my worry is we've had this report. Do you think, is there a reflection from the Met? Is there anything in there where you were like, oh, yeah, we hadn't thought of that and we're going to make a difference?
It's not really my place, Chair, to ask an Assembly member a question, but I might have reversed that and said, it sounds like you don't think so, do you? And I think I'd probably land in much the same space. I think the commentary on stop search is important. What I don't want to do, Assembly member, is diminish the points that are in there. I'm not suggesting they're not important. I'm not suggesting we're not paying attention. We have spent 18 months developing, alongside the Mayor's Office, a stop search charter because we take the points that are raised in this report and have been repeatedly seriously, as we take our commitment to keep London's communities safe seriously. So not revelatory, reinforcing.
That's really helpful clarity. And then just a final one on the precision stop and search pilot. So the recommendation 18 says that the Met will work with MOPAC to ensure an evaluation of that. So I just wondered what discussions have been had around that.
I might turn to the Deputy Mayor, who looks poised on this, just to say we clearly want to use the micro pilots of different approaches to get the best insight we can. We know particular communities affected. I would hand to Deputy Mayor Kaya to address that point.
All I was going to say is that these are exactly the sort of things that we want to work through the London Drugs Forum. So, yeah, that's how we'll do that.
That's great, because obviously we do really want to see change, because obviously, as I've said before, these findings have been found again and again, and we need to do things differently to see those changes. But yeah, back to you, Chair. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I'm going to call a break now for 5 minutes, I'm afraid. So if everybody could be back here at 8 minutes past 12, please. Thank you. start. So the next question is Assembly Member Best.
Thanks. Good morning to both of you. We're coming back to the London Drugs Commission here. Obviously, you've talked about the large amount of recommendations in here, but I mean, it's Chapter 10, right, and the 18 recommendations there that we are interested in. And to boil it down, it does come down to recommendation 30, really, that obviously we want your response on Deputy Mayor. So although it's a large swathe of recommendations, it really is just one that we were hoping, I think, for a little bit more from you today. But taking the report in general, I disagree with my colleague. I think it's actually a very balanced and nuanced report. The problem is, I think it makes a strange conclusion given the details that in there. It references the 4 frameworks that you have to operate in: prohibition, depenalisation, decriminalisation and legalisation. And I would argue this is arguing for the worst of all worlds in terms of a model that doesn't make any move to make drugs safer, doesn't make any revenue, and will lead to greater exploitation of young people. Is that something that you recognise at all? Did you think the same about the commentary, perhaps suggesting there was little to substantiate this being the best model, yet it reaches a conclusion via recommendation 30 that decriminalisation for cannabis is the best model?
Thank you, Assembly Member Best. I mean, I recognise some of the characterisation you're saying, especially around, I suppose, revenue. But I think I'll return to my previous answer in saying I think it needs to be recognised that it's not saying that cannabis, moreover, should be decriminalised. It's saying that low-level possession of natural cannabis, that they found to be an evidence base for, given the wider harms.
I think, sorry, and when I say that, I'm talking in shorthand because I presume we all know what it means. But I am talking about the possession in for personal use. But what to me that says, as somebody that comes from a children's services background, and I'm sure for people like Assembly Member Bailey as well, is that leads to more recruitment of more young people, because if I can put more of you out on the streets with this personal use capacity, then you're going to get away from the law even more so. So I think that actually exacerbates the issue, and that is my concern. But I wanted to come on to what I think has been touched on, and that this seems to be predominantly about stop and search, and what the Commission has concerns about with stop and search. But to be broad about this, we're talking about if we brought in this decriminalisation, what we would also look to do is strengthen antisocial behaviour capacity and tools of the police to put in orders of antisocial behaviour. We're just shifting this problem, because I can tell you now, and I'm sure no one would disagree with me, that if a group of middle-class white people are in Hyde Park smoking a joint, they are much less likely to be approached for antisocial behaviour than a group of young black men at a bus stop smoking a joint. Those groups will be treated differently, I presume, and I think most people would understand that categorisation. So actually, there's no change at all. You're shifting a problem. There's no point decriminalising possession if the idea is that stop and search has racial prejudice. You're just going to move that into another sector of the law. I
mean, conscious of what the I'm answering, but I'm sure if the deputy wants to come in, he will. Conscious of what the deputy said previously in recognising the work that has happened around the stop and search charter over the last 18 months. I know that we discussed it in this committee last month, and I fully agree with your characterisation in terms of, and I think Lord Bailey spoke about it at a previous committee too, about the acknowledgement that there seems to be a very different approach between, as you said, a group of young white people in a park smoking and otherwise. And I do think that is something, and we spoke about in this committee previously, actually there is no ethical, use of drugs, right? We know that drugs markets are connected to high exploitation, high harm. And as I've said previously, that's why I think the recommendations about making sure that we take a harm reductive approach and that we are tackling the wider drug economy is important.
Okay, it sounds in so many words, I think that you are leaning towards not accepting recommendation 30. If I can take everything you just said, it sounds like you understand that bit of it. The thing I would also say is that did you pay attention as well to, I think one of the really important bits, and Assemblymember Bailey was talking about perceptions from communities and making sure to speak to all communities. The Lambeth trial for depenalisation showed that it was white people that were more in favour of depenalisation, whereas it was black and Asian communities that were against that. And so I think actually there is something in having to look at what communities think about this, because again it seems to be there is that group of middle class white people that enjoy the drugs recreationally and don't have to worry about getting stabbed, don't have to worry about their kids getting stabbed, that can have these opinions. And there are communities that are feeling the pain of this drug trade, and I think we need to make sure we listen to those, as that study from Lambeth on the views of that scheme showed.
In my previous role, I was in one of the studies, evidence calls, and what I think was important about the session that I was in, if I reflect on it, is it was primarily people from black, Asian, non-white minoritized communities who were asked to give opinions. And like all groups of people, there were very various views and opinions. There's a lot of, for example, there's a lot of people that hold very strong religious beliefs and therefore have very strong opinions on drugs. So I think you're completely correct that we shouldn't assume that all white people or all black people think one way on a certain issue. Completely not. I would never subscribe to that. And I do think we need to recognise the disproportionate effect on the drug trade on marginalised communities in London. But as I've said previously, for me, it's about how do we stop an economy that is made on exploitation, primarily of black young boys.
Not by decriminalising it, I would suggest, Deputy Mayor. But I was just moving on to the conversations with government that you've had around this. Is there anything that you'd like to say about that? Obviously, government being quite strong and saying, and Angela Rayner saying that they don't subscribe to the recommendations, or sorry, let me be very clear, to recommendation 30 of this report, because to be clear, there are other recommendations I think a lot of us could presume are easy to support. Have you spoken with government about that? About recommendation 30 specifically?
No, Assembly Member Beth, I haven't. I mean, I know that obviously Lord Faulkner did the review and throughout was talking across various stakeholders, including government. But I know that the powers around legislation are for the government to consider, and therefore the report has been submitted to them, and I think it's only respectful that they consider that.
I suppose you need to be clear on your view, and I suppose what we're getting from today is on recommendation 30, decriminalisation of cannabis for personal possession. You aren't clear on your stance. Do you know when we will be clear on what your stance is?
I mean, what I would say is it's not a recommendation for City Hall, it's a recommendation for government, and therefore I think government needs to, decide on that.
It's a City Hall commission. If City Hall agrees with it, if the Deputy Mayor and the Mayor agree on it, they need to make that clear, because that would inform the conversation with government. Because if you don't agree, then the conversation is very short, because government's made its position clear. If you make your position clear, that's a very short conversation that basically says we're putting it in the bin. If you disagree, then that's a bigger conversation. If you agree with recommendation 30, that's a bigger conversation. So your position does matter.
Thank you for saying that my position matters. What we will be doing is taking the whole of the report, all 42 recommendations to consider. As I said, I think taking them in isolation isn't helpful, to the London Drugs Forum and going through the recommendations and considering approaches and understanding where partners are and what their red lines are and acting appropriately.
When can we expect to see that decision made?
When can you expect to see a reflection of the London Drugs Forum's?
No, when can I expect to see, which I suppose you're saying you need to consult with the London Drugs Forum, when can I expect to see your feedback on recommendation 30 about decriminalisation of cannabis for possession?
It's not a recommendation for us, it's a recommendation for government. So it's a government decision.
No,
They don't
it's a
need
City
to...
Hall report, and as the Deputy Mayor and Mayor, whether you agree with it or not is extremely important. You will have to make a call as to whether you agree with it. I don't understand. If you can't, we can't have City Hall commissions and just send them off to government and they say, what do you think? And we're like, oh, we're not sure. That's not how it works. You have to make a call. When will you make a call?
I mean, what I will say is the Mayor commissioned a whole report, and therefore the 42 recommendations, as I've previously said repeatedly, will be considered by the London Drugs Forum.
Okay, and so when will we have the outcome of that?
The meeting of the London Drugs Forum hasn't happened yet. Once we've had that, I can get back to the committee on a timescale.
Okay, but just in terms of months, weeks, days, when can we expect that
Assembly Member Best, the Deputy Mayor has said that she will get back to us on a timescale. We really are short of time, so could we move on, please?
Question, though.
I'm not arguing with you, Assembly Member Best. The Deputy Mayor has answered the question. She said she will get back to us on the timescale. Assembly Member Bailey.
How does the Met ensure the transparency around reporting cannabis-related stop and shirts on racial disparity? I want to be very clear. I listen to this conversation and it often sounds like, and I really regret these words I'm about to say, that it's middle-class white people using the pain of black people being stopped on the street to talk about disproportionality, forgetting, of course, that it's young black men who are the most murdered community in all of London who suffer from this drug trade. So how will the Met collect that data? Will you collect that data?
So I think there's already a very extensive reporting of data in relation to stop search. We know we need to continue to improve the quality of that, and the transparency of that follows. The stop search charter makes a series of commitments to do that. I think, Assembly Member, you're also presenting that alongside the experience of violence in communities, and we would continue to do this. We would continue to do the same to describe where disproportionality arises in other ways. Clearly, we all aspire to a world where that unequal experience of crime doesn't exist. While it does, the use of police powers, or you would expect align. Where it doesn't align, we need to test the question of whether there is inappropriate disproportionality, and there's evidence of that. I'm sure in individual stop searches and in specific operations, which needs to be addressed, has been an issue in history. But I think in summary, we are keen to play out as much of our. I think it goes to the wider point about transparency. We want to be complete and holistic in describing the work we're doing in this area, including the diversionary work and including the experience of criminal exploitation, which underpins it. But we would want, if I may stand on the point about where decisions will be made, we would want any decisions made on policy and legislation in any area of criminal justice to be fully informed by a rounded assessment of their impact.
Do your figures indicate that there's a high level of drug-related violence within the black community? Do your figures bear that out, or is that a myth?
There is a clear indication that in the region of 70%, it's about 71% of those who are criminally exploited as children are associated with drugs markets, And we know that very high levels of violence exist in those drugs markets.
So does that then ask you as a police officer to direct your resources towards that problem, regardless of what it looks like from a racial point of view?
I mean, as the start and end of our work is to protect those who are vulnerable, in the same way, and I've touched on violence against women and girls. Women are tragically enormously overrepresented in victims of in the victims of violence of that nature, of victims of violence in domestic settings, and of sexual violence. And so we steer our efforts to the protection of women and to the pursuit of the predominantly men who commit those offences. And for the same reasons, we're targeted in terms of our work on organised crime networks and the violence associated, not on racial lines, but on lines of the harm that is caused to communities.
Thank you. I appreciate that answer. It's clear. So, Deputy Mayor, I certainly want to return. We're going to collect, or the data is already collected around stop and search, which this report focuses on heavily, and where violence happens in London, in which communities it appears. So I'll return to my theme. Are you worried that an adoption of this recommendation in 30 in particular will lead to an increase in violence in any particular community in London?
No, as long as the other recommendations are taken and enacted in its fullest form.
So that means, so you are happy to accept that recommendation then?
No, as I said previously to Assembly Member Best, we need to take this into a place where we can really consider it, along with partners, work through the 42 recommendations and discuss it properly. Okay. I'm going to draw this to a close, but with one small question. How much, every time drugs are decriminalised somewhere, there's at least a small increase in adult use in particular. It's not as clear with teenagers. I think that's because of the cost involved. Adult use in particular. How much of a rise is acceptable, Deputy Mayor? How much of a rise are we prepared to accept in London in drug use, bearing in mind its negative social impacts it has? There's several studies in Canada and also in America that demonstrate at least a small rise. How much are we prepared to accept in London? I'm really sorry. I know that I have in here the recommendation, the evidence that was pulled through on this very specific point about there not being a significant amount of uptake in drugs after criminalisation. I think what you're saying is, even if it's a small bit, is that acceptable? I think what I would say, and conscious that I'm not an expert in this area, and the recommendations are formed by experts, is what is the balance across the system? And for me, a harm reductive approach is something that is the greater price. If we can have a greater focus on making sure that people with addictions are getting the support they need, if we can have a greater focus on smashing exploiters and getting a criminal justice outcome for them, I think for me, on balance, that's where the focus should be.
But studies will suggest none of that's going to happen. And of course, we've had a lot of talk this morning about disproportionality, and this will disproportionately affect some very vulnerable communities in London. So we're not reducing harm at all. In fact, for certain people, we're making it nice and legal. They can smoke in the park, great. For other people, we're condemning their community to huge levels of violence and levels of addiction, higher levels of addiction as well. So at what point do we think it's a problem that's going to happen? And I say those words there's multiple studies around the world that will demonstrate there'll be some uplift. We know for a fact in London that uplift will be in poor communities around antisocial behaviour, crime, and the mental health outcomes, poor mental health outcomes. So why are we prepared to send a message that we want to legalise?
You're obviously making some assumptions about what we know would happen. We don't know.
No. These my assumptions are at least as good as the ones you're making because they come from studies. You cited the study, the London Drug Commission study, as evidence. I am using evidence as at least as much validity as yours. So I think it's valid for me to say as much.
I'm saying that given that we're discussing the recommendations of this commission without us submitting, which I don't believe we are doing, is submitting other alternative evidence and scrutinising it against it and comparing the validity of studies, I don't know how to, give weight to that. But what I would say is, for me, there's a fundamental point about making sure that we do exactly, I think actually we're in full agreement that we need to make sure that the most vulnerable in our society, the communities that already are, disproportionately affected by harm, have that harm reduced. And through the work that we were doing in operations like Operation Adder, we're making sure that happens, and it's really important. That's why I said previously that yes, there's a question here about the legislative status of possession of natural cannabis. Okay, but there's also a really important conversation about the addictiveness, the psychosis levels. Do we have a substance abuse intervention system that is effective? Do we have the mental health support in the community that we need to make sure early diagnoses of concern are diagnosed so that young people don't self-medicate? There's a wider scope and scale, and that's why this is important.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor, but we know we have none of those things in place, and that's a fact. Chair, back to you.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, we have limited time, so I am going to, first of all, ask the panel, would you be able to stay for an extra 15 minutes until 15:15? Committee, how many of you would be able to stay for 15 minutes? I'm asking for Chorus's sake. Yeah. Okay. Great, thank you. It's just because we have the Deputy Commissioner here, I don't want to refer the sentencing review section to the next meeting. So I would ask you all to pick up the pace, amalgamate questions where you can, and be as succinct as possible. Assembly Member Hall.
Very quickly, one of the recommendations in the report says that MOPAC should mandate those charged with scrutiny of the police to review a random sample of body-worn video of drug-related stop and search at least quarterly and report any concerns. Firstly, how are you going to take that forward? Secondly, I thought these dips were routinely sampled anyway. And thirdly, and the thing that I'm most worried about, because I've sat on these stop and search scrutiny groups, we talk about disproportionality, but we never look at there is a disproportionate amount of people in a specific community that might be more likely to take drugs, or we don't look at the disproportionality in a different way. Sometimes an area or a community or something else, then they might be more likely to take drugs, to do other things that they shouldn't. And that disproportionality is never put into the figures in the stop and search. You're looking perplexed and confused, but it's a fact. And you've only got to go and sit on some of these stop and search scrutiny groups. I did one in Harrow, and a disproportionate amount of people were coming up for something a long time ago. It doesn't matter, but the point was Harrow is one of the most diverse areas in London. So, of course, the figures were going to be higher than in other areas, but that disproportionality wasn't mentioned. So my point is it works lots of different ways. If you've got a community of any description that is more likely to take drugs, they are more likely to be stopped in stop and search for drug possession or whatever else. So for time's sake, can you look into that? Because we only hear disproportionality in one way, and it just skews the figures completely. And I assume you'll take it forward, but I know we do dip searching anyway.
Yeah, on the body-worn camera piece, and I don't know if the Dep wants to come in briefly on it, because it's something that we're in live conversation about how do we have greater transparency and openness on body-worn camera. We do, and as part of the wider research that we're doing through the Disproportionality Board on stop and search, body-worn camera is one aspect of that research. And yes, I can give you a fuller update on the stop and search research when it's concluded.
Okay. That's not really what I was
Chair,
saying,
not much to add. I think, as I addressed an earlier point, we would always be keen to place the use of police powers in the context of the wider experience of crime, to orientate and locate it, at the same time as recognising that individual interactions are incredibly important and ripple down across communities and indeed have done across generations. So I think both can be true, and we see the wider access to body-worn video as being an important part of both increasing the quality of our supervision of the use of police powers, supporting officers who have felt on occasions less confident to use those powers, and we know need to, in the protection of the public, and also giving communities confidence that that's been done in a way which is focused and fair and proportionate.
Thank you. I'll leave it there for time's sake.
Thank you very much. Assembly Member Best.
Thanks. So sorry. Thanks. Matt, if I could come to you and just ask about the managing the relationship between drugs and mental health.
So I think I don't have a great deal of expertise to bring to the specific point, and I think we need to acknowledge that there is an increasing and growing body of research about the changing patterns of drug consumption and their impact on mental health and wider community health. We see, obviously, substance misuse present in a great number of the crimes of violence we attend to, including those that I've alluded to in domestic settings as well as in street violence. And we recognise that many individuals are in need of support around substance misuse. The Deputy Mayor has alluded to the Project ADDA, where we have had focused support for individuals, and it's worth saying, individuals, of course, at risk themselves, but who are a enormous draw on public services because of their substance misuse. We have seen a real impact. So where we've been able to get an effective partnership team around individuals, you can reduce that demand on wider public services by 2/3. ADDA will demonstrate, and that includes, of course, extremely pressured mental health services. It's already been alluded to, but the condition of these wider services, which we seek to access in support, is not adequate for the challenge it's facing into. Services like child and adolescent mental health services under enormous pressure. But to the science of that, I think I'd remit that to other and better informed voices.
Is there occasion when you're attending what is mental health distress calls, or the police, I should say in general, not necessarily yourself, where individuals may have possession, small personal supply of cannabis, that the police are then able to confiscate off them for their own well-being and to help?
I mean, clearly we encounter the presence of drugs in a number of our interactions. Arrests, for example, which lead to searches back in custody suites or on the street for other offences, quite often reveal that or will do. I think that the principal mechanism for supporting people away from addictions is more sustained and more complex than those individual interactions.
Of course, but perhaps it's something for recommendation 30 that if somebody was in psychosis and in possession of cannabis, the police would have to allow them to continue to carry that.
I mean, I've laid out our response to that recommendation, and in the wider sense, I think our reflections on a report which seeks to address both those questions of substance misuse, but also is bringing together well understood concerns about stop search with a question about an adjustment to the Misuse of Drugs Act. I don't think I can add any more to the responses I've already given.
I think it's just a wider consideration of if that was to progress, how would the police be able to safeguard people still, if necessary? But
an Assembly member, just to be clear, and so I mean, without I'm obviously wanting to manage time, I'm keen to offer some comments on the criminal justice system later, in particular. But part of the reason we have this escalating intervention, the 3 strikes process I've described, is we don't have a criminal justice system which can respond to more of the nature of this casework. But the full, were Parliament to want to engage this question fully, we'd bring our full operational experience to bear on that. Thank you.
And Deputy Mayor, just finally to yourself, one of the concerns that the report does outline is that the London Drugs Commission report does outline is that a decriminalisation model could lead to more mental health issues being exacerbated. With the also recognition in the report that drug services are overstretched, is this a concern to you that actually we aren't really equipped to deal with the pressures of both the intersection of drugs and mental health in London?
Thank you, Assembly Member Bess. I think as well it's acknowledging where mental health services are as well. I'm really concerned that mental health services have been overstretched and underfunded significantly for some time. And so I think, that's why I'm very clear that all of the if this was a consideration for government, and that is key to this, that we would need to think, like we're going to hopefully talk about the sentence review, about the wider impacts across the whole myriad of partners that a change of this kind would take.
I suppose, but the recognition is that it's not about the change. We're already there with overstretched services. So the quicker you can come out and support some of these recommendations that I think everyone can get behind, the quicker you can make the call to have better services supporting those addicted to drugs in London.
I mean, I can unequivocally say that I think that we need to make sure we have better services and advocate strongly for that. To the prevention harm reduction approach is writ large in the Mayor's Police and Crime Plan.
So you are happy to talk about some recommendations but not others?
Sorry, was that a question or a?
No, it's a reflection on the fact that you said that you couldn't talk about the recommendations, but you are happy to talk about some recommendations and not others.
Me saying that the mental health services and drug services are overstretched and over demand is stating a fact. Me looking through the recommendations, 42 recommendations that would affect partners, and coming with a considered response, I would hope would be seen as helpful to the board.
You have agreed to some of the recommendations there.
Okay, can we move on now, please? Assembly Member Garbett.
Thank you. I just have some questions on the diversion schemes that already happen. So I know that some people who use drugs are diverted. Well, then referrals are made to drug treatment services through ADA. I just wondered if that's pre or post arrest, because I think the other diversion scheme that we're aware of is divert, and that's in custody, so post arrest. So I'd be interested in, how those schemes work, how many people have been referred through it, and then what your plans are for further diversion. Because I think, obviously, we alluded to earlier, I think there is agreement that we need to challenge kind of exploitation and treat those who use drugs with compassion and reduce harm. So it's just how that is working with the diversion schemes that are in place.
I think your question, Assembly Member, started in custody suites, so why don't I make a start? So drugs testing on arrest is an important intervention for us. It helps us understand the extent of the interplay between drugs harm and harm on individuals and on communities. Since making improvements in drug testing on arrival, so drugs testing in custody suites, in April 2024, we've seen a significant increase, so approaching 14,000 people tested, with about 5,000 of those referred for drugs assessment from their local treatment provider. We've streamlined some of our processes to get more of those potential drugs treatment workers into custody suites. I mean, it's a palpably important moment when somebody's in custody to take the opportunity to intervene in a way which can give direct access and support. And we've now got 80 drugs treatment workers working directly in custody suites linked to Project ADA. People, of course, are also recognise their own need. So voluntary referral is an important part of the process, and we're seeing more and more people follow a path of voluntary referrals. So hopefully that's a reasonably precise answer to the fact we're seeing an increase. And I should say those increases are quite stark. So the testing up by 70% on the previous year, and the referrals up about a third. All that's been said about the condition of the services that they're referred into stands, but the reality is we are doing more to try to identify people at point of arrest.
Great. And is there a differentiation, or how would the police respond if someone tests positive and their arrest is just to do with the possession of a drug, versus if they test positive and their arrest was to do with another crime? So we know that there's high testing of cocaine, for example, of people who have committed domestic violence offences. So are those two drug uses treated differently? So if someone is using drugs related to their own mental health trauma and needs a harm reduction approach versus if someone has used drugs within the context of other crime? So
I think already in the way that I've described, the response in terms of enforcement is different with the ladder of 3 interventions for cannabis use, which is distinct from other drug use. So I think we see different outcomes from custody for different drug types as a result of that policy position. In terms of whether the crime type which is associated is a factor in that decision making, we're applying harm reduction mechanisms in parallel with criminal justice. So I think we would largely be going after those outcomes in parallel rather than having the nature of the crime make a particular impact. I think we would, however, be talking to services about the extent of the harm caused by individuals on others in terms of prioritisation of work. And that is I've got to say from my work in counter-terrorism, that's a fairly well-rehearsed and quite difficult conversation about making sure that harm to others is also a factor in prioritising access to treatment.
Thank you. It'd be really interesting to see what you mentioned there about the different outcomes around different drugs. It'd be really interesting to see some data on that. And then my final question, because I know we need to move on, is I know we've mentioned ADA, but obviously there was a national review back in February which found that some parts of ADA aren't as effective as other parts. So I just wondered if there was going to be a Met response to that national review.
Yeah, I can't speak to the detail of our response to the review, but I'm sure we'd be happy to provide more information in due course.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much. Moving on to our next section now, which is about vehicle ramming. Assembly Member Lord Bailey.
This is for the Deputy Commissioner. Do you believe that the Merseyside Police were right to release the ethnicity of the subject responsible for the Liverpool parade attack, and when it did?
Thank you very much for the question, Lord Bailey. These are questions which I've given a lot of thought to in the course of my previous role. We've seen that mis and disinformation fill the void when insufficient information is provided after incidents that cause community concerns. Clearly, the most extant example of that in the last period has been those terrible events in Southport last year, and reports by His Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary, as well as reports by people such as the Independent Reviewer of Terrorist Legislation, have been clear that the police ought to endeavour to fill that gap by providing more information at the earliest point they can. We run into challenges around the contempt of court laws, of course, and our principal goal is always to achieve justice for families and for victims. So there is a balance to strike between the amount of information that can be released in the wake of an incident and the amount of information which might subsequently become available or relevant at trial. But to be precise, in answer to your question, instances like providing clarity on the nature of an event and who was involved can contribute, I believe, to reducing the risks of misinformation and disinformation filling that gap, and therefore reduce harm to a range of people, whether it's disorder on the streets or the misdirected targeting of particular communities or particular locations. So Merseyside Police clearly have had both of those experiences in the last year or so, and our changing approach is emerging, and I'm very supportive of a changing approach which sees us move quicker to bring fast facts in the place of false information.
I think most people agree. So you're saying as quickly as legally possible?
As quickly and as fully as legally possible, a conversation for us to continue with the wider criminal justice system. The Law Commission is currently completing work on the contempt of court laws. You'll find in the public domain, I'm sure this committee could have access to letters I've written to the Law Commission on that topic. We basically are running a 19th century approach to providing information in incidents in the 21st century, and the people who are exploiting that are bigots and troublemakers, and we need to put information in the hands of the public so they can make informed choices about where their concerns should fall.
In the interest of time, I'm going to clumsily crash two things together. That's a poor use of English. I'm going to crush two things together. Is London... does London have all it needs to deal with vehicle ramming attacks? I attend Parliament a lot, and there's things all over the place, but they're rare. And the other piece is, do you think the Met should have released the details of in the Chris Cabba case earlier? Do you think that would have made it easier for the community to deal with the fallout from that?
Let me take those two quite different questions separately. On the first point, we paid a lot of attention to the question of hostile vehicle mitigation, the kind of barriers and mitigations that you've seen across Westminster. Of course, after the 2017 attacks, you've seen changes across London. The most visible of those are very probably in Westminster. We've worked closely with planning authorities and others to build more of those in deliberately. So where buildings like new stadiums are being built, that there is a deliberate attempt to put hostile vehicle mitigation in. It's expensive and ugly to retrofit it, and it's important to get that right at the point of design. However, we know that so in answer to your, is there enough? We know there are locations across London that could benefit from more hostile vehicle mitigation. You would expect me not to describe what those are to this committee, but we're actively engaged with a number of local authorities and businesses to talk about where improvements could be made. Where there can't be improvements in permanent measures, temporary measures, those tend to be the expensive and ugly instances. We think you get a better outcome for the public space if you build it in up front, but we are talking about how to replace temporary measures with more permanent measures. And of course, we will use mobile hostile vehicle mitigation. You saw in New Orleans at the turn of the year how an attempt at mobile hostile vehicle mitigation failed effectively. So we're looking internationally for comparisons and for learning about the technologies which can provide safety. You will never protect every crowded place, but London as a global, vibrant city where people come together from its north, south, east, west, is clearly a place we need to be very focused. We'll use a whole set of other powers like road closures and orders which prevent vehicles mixing with crowds, but you have seen internationally and domestically how difficult that can be. So it's a real area of focus. Lord Harris's review of those questions since 2017 has been an important vehicle for the Mayor's Office, London's Contest Board, Counter-Terrorism Strategy Board, and the Met to work together on those issues. Your second question was very direct about the fatal shooting of Chris Cabba. I think it's quite difficult to be very precise on that in the time available. The questions about what information might have informed or reassured communities quite difficult to assess. Those cases are have an extra layer of complexity because fatal police shootings are almost exclusively investigated by the Independent Office of Police Complaints, so police conduct. So those questions, I think, need to be worked through my ambition to see us share more, quicker, sooner, more fully needs to be one which is backed by the Crown Prosecution Service, by the IOPC and by the courts. Away from the specific case, I think if we do that more, we will generally build trust, because we will build a sense that we are prepared to be transparent at the earliest opportunity we can.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Cooper. Thank you very much. Assembly Member Roberts.
Well, thank you, Chair. I mean, it's difficult, given as Assembly Member Lord Bailey pretty much read out my question earlier, question 15. Thank you. The one which I would ask as a supplementary, however, because we touched on New Orleans, and then there's been other attacks in places like Vancouver in Canada, Munich in Germany, Magdeburg, all of that. Unfortunately, many of these are going to be what's termed as lone wolf attacks. Are we in the position, because obviously normal counterintelligence intelligence methods don't work with those types of attack, and given that we've got Pride coming up, we've got Notting Hill Carnival coming up, are we as safe, do you think, as we possibly can be for large-scale events in the capital, given what we've seen happening elsewhere?
We're incredibly focused on the safety of those public gatherings. You've described some very high-profile instances. Self-initiated terrorists, lone actors are harder to spot and harder to stop. That is a reality faced into by our partnership with MI5. We're co-located in London with them in the Counter-Terrorism Operations Centre. So as far as international comparisons, I think we have a world-class set of arrangements here which give us the highest confidence they can. You need a strategy which both pursues the potential terrorists but also protects their targets and prepares for the moments when there might be attacks. That is why we see security coordinators working alongside all of those events which you've touched on, to make sure that physical design and operational practice can reduce the threat as far as possible. But I think we should be realistic. We're in a period of enduring terrorist risk, in which, contrast, I started my work in counter-terrorism the week before 9/11. I caught the back end of the Irish Troubles and peace process in that period, and not only are we still dealing with sophisticated organised terrorist plots, but we are increasingly dealing with young people motivated by what they see online, with access to knives or a vehicle can have devastating effects. So that is why we are really determined to be robust about the security planning of those major events, and why the vigilance of the public and the contribution of our partners is so important.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. No further.
Thank you very much. Assembly Member Roberts, did you want to add anything else?
Not particularly, no, thank you.
Thank you very much. Now moving on to our final section, which is about the independent sentencing review. And again, pace please, colleagues. Assembly Member Best.
Thank you. I will start with yourself, Deputy Mayor, and just ask, what was your reaction to the sentencing review? Are there any areas that you welcome and any areas of concern?
Thank you, Assembly Member Best. Yes, this is definitely a review that is significant. In the police and crime plan, we talk about having an improved criminal justice system focused on victims. So I welcome the sentencing review coming forward. I think it's difficult for us to see it in isolation, and I'm conscious we need the Leveson review to come forward as well to give us that fuller picture. But I welcome the approach. I think there's a lot we need to work through. We met as the London Criminal Justice Board last Friday, and that's a cross-partnership board with the police, the CPS, and prisons, probation, all in attendance. And I'm really struck from that board that the thrust of the legislation really takes us into an important space. But as I intimated earlier, I think we need to understand the scale of the issue and the other agencies that need to be in effect here. So we know that short prison sentences have a reoffending rate of 59% versus community sentences. However, I think it's really important that we recognise how a multi-agency approach of offender management is needed here, and the sentencing reviews and its recommendations follow the resource that would require to be effective. I do welcome that the government has put £7 billion to build 14,000 new prison places by 2031, £700 million extra for probation services, and 450 million per year for courts, so that victims can see the justice they deserve. And I really want to centre victims in this conversation because it's important in two respects. Partly, we know that court delays are having a significant impact on victims, and the Victim Commissioner, Claire Waxman, the independent representative, has done a lot of work in this space, and it's really, I know how devastated, heard firsthand from victims how devastating it is to have prolonged court cases and how likely they are to walk away from them. And so to have confidence in the system, we need a criminal justice system that is moving. But I also recognise that the change in legislation has the potential to bring concern to victims as well. If people are being released earlier, we need to work through. The sentencing review talks about a progression model, and we need to work through how that would be enacted and resourced. We've seen great strides in the work, especially around domestic abuse stalking, around the use of GPS tagging as a way of managing offenders. We saw an interesting model around smart water that's used in other forces. So there are ways of doing it, but I think we also need to make sure that the legislation that brought in come with the resources for us to make sure that we're taking rehabilitation seriously and reducing recidivism. I can't say that, recidivism, but yes.
Yeah, we're talking about reduction of 10,000 prison places, and we want to centre victims in this. And victims currently see punishment as a custodial sentence. I haven't spoken to a victim that said, "Oh, they got a community order. That's great. Oh, they have to be at home at 8 o'clock. That's great." How the sentencing review talks about being much more imaginative in how we view community sentencing. Do you have any ideas of what that looks like, so it looks like real justice to victims?
Thank you. Yes, I mean, what I would say is I think we do need to recognise as well that the bill takes a year to ascend, and we have the time to make sure, and that's something that I was grateful to AC Pippa Mills for saying that she really wants to work alongside us in making sure we're getting real evidence and data to submit to the Home Office on the gaps analysis and potential models. We have seen potential models work in this space. We fund the Integrated Offender Management Service, which does see a reduction of reoffending, but also it's important to note that the review talks about exceptions, and domestic abuse being one of those exceptions. So I think that that's important from the short sentencing part. But I'm keen to take the work forward. I think we can't stay with the status quo. I can't. We know that prisons are massively overfull. We know that court delays are significant and harmful to victims, and we know that the CPS and Met are struggling with issues of case file quality to make sure that those things are moving forward. And these are all things that we work really hard on in the Criminal Justice Board, and having a regional approach to this will be really key.
Just to say there, Kai, I did ask about how that community sentencing could look to bring justice to victims, and you talked about the rehabilitative model, which is important. But again, we're talking about how, for victims, a custodial sentence is where they see justice. And so I think the answer didn't quite get to that point of how can victims see justice, because the review brings up their lack of trust in the system. So I really would like to be more victim-centred on that.
Can I? Yeah, absolutely. And I really, you're completely right, Assembly Member Best. I also wanted to say that we, the Mayor's Office of Police and Crime, fund a lot of work in the diversion space, and one of the key things, in the perpetrator intervention space, and one of the key programs we have is Divert, which is a perpetrator program, and I think that that's really important, because that could be used as, you know, an alternative, that offenders have to sign up to these programs in order to do that. And I think that victims have the surveys that we've done have said that they do really welcome perpetrators taking up those interventions.
I'm sure alongside other measures as well. I don't think they'd be happy with just them doing a course, personally. Just do you agree with the Commissioner who has noted that the reform to sentencing will likely have a drastic impact, with the police continuing to chase people they put in prison and increasing demand? Do you agree with his evaluation?
I can see the concerns there, and obviously in the context of a spending review and the constraint in budgets, that is important, and that's why I'm really grateful, as I said, that AC Pippa Mills is wanting to work alongside us in this to understand those concerns and use data and modelling to think about how we might approach it.
Okay, and just one final question from me, Deputy Mayor. Do you recognise the considerable public anger at the moment when they see people serving longer sentences for tweets and internet activity like that and saying things online compared to violent crimes? That gives an idea, perhaps, that the sentencing and the overpopulation of the prison spaces isn't quite right. Do you understand that anger?
I mean, I think you know, the work that, as I said, the sentencing review and the Leveson inquiry are important to make sure that we have the best possible system. I will say, and I know Assembly Hall has spoken about this previously, I don't think things that happen online, and we know significantly and increasingly, are without harm. You know, death threats, rape threats are not without harm. They threaten, you know, primarily women's abilities to live a fulfilled life. So I think we need to take it in those contexts. But I do welcome that we're looking at doing things differently.
I think, but we still need to draw that distinction between
Assembly
the
Member
physical
Best,
harm.
I'm sorry, we do have to move on. People have agreed to stay for extra time, and we want to use that time to make sure everyone gets to ask their questions. Assembly Member Small Edwards.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, Deputy Commissioner and Deputy Mayor. How will the increase in offenders being managed in the community impact the work of the Met?
Thank you very much, Assembly Member. I can't make a direct link between these set of numbers, but let me just acknowledge where we see ourselves today. We deal with prison recalls, number of people who are in communities who are, you know, need to be brought back to prison because of breaches. In the month of September, 292. In the month of November, 408. December, 360. The numbers of people we're dealing with on recall is increasing. Those are individuals who we are not only duty bound but determined to pursue. Many of them have, you know, potentially pose a risk to communities and specific victims. So we are disappointed that your question, how has that impact been understood, has not been assessed in the sentencing review fully, and we are working up our own understanding of what the review itself might mean in terms of the numbers entering communities. But to be, you know, the number of registered sex offenders in our communities in London has gone from 7 to 10,000. We're monitoring 20,000 different orders, including 5,000 sexual harm prevention orders. We are not without offenders to manage in the community. and people are clearly committing offences, and reoffending. So I think that the headline is the one I gave earlier. We recognise government is posed this real challenge, that sentencing policy and prison building have not kept pace. We recognise that there are choices for governments about how to apply the scarce resource of prison capacity, but you can't do that in communities more without impacting those communities and asking more of policing. It would be really unfortunate if the only consequence of these reforms were to have a revolving door that just was spinning quicker. Effectively, and I don't want to burden this committee with anecdotes, but in conversation, the probation officer in the last week, she described how all of those she had seen released early the majority had re-entered prison on recall. So we have asked, and we haven't yet seen what the total path for the group who've been early released has been. We know we will see some of those re-enter prison. That creates capacity in the meantime in the prison. It does that job, but it puts them back in the community and pushes them to responsibility of us and the probation service. We have not seen any recognition of that yet, and we're concerned about that. We're concerned about it to protect the public, not in the interest of our own institution. I mean, we want to make sure that if that door is going to spin, as it inevitably will, that there is a good response to prioritise the individuals who are of greatest risk being held in custody, and it's a thoughtful process. We need those risks which fall to communities to be better recognised. If I may just land on one point, conscious of time, Chair, that is part of a wider system which is creaking. I mean, beyond creaking, and it's that system which my colleagues, officers and staff are facing victims today who ask the question, what can I expect from the criminal justice process? And I can tell you what they can expect in this moment. They can expect to see 61 trials listed in 2029, 513 listed in 2028. And that's our reality today, that good people in the Met, officers are sat today, now, taking statements from victims, and when asked, what can I expect, are faced with the reality of having to say, you might expect it could take those years, 4 years, in 61 cases already, to see a Crown Court trial listed. Fewer sitting days in London's courts, some of those days being traded for crime in the southeast of England. I think we just have to be very, very clear that this is a system that needs desperate intervention. And so the Leveson review into the wider criminal justice system alongside the Gort review on sentencing is as important, to have a system which can service the needs of victims, bring about justice, see something which feels like it makes a difference for individual victims and communities. But the changes are going to have to be drastic to remedy the situation that I've just described. And they're going to, Assembly Member, thank you for your question, they're going to have to take account of the consequences, not for individual components of that system, for the whole system when it's taken together, and particularly for communities. We need to see radical reform of a criminal justice system which is now in an unsustainable state.
Thank you very much, Deputy Commissioner, for that really detailed answer. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Assembly Member Hall.
Right, this is a yes or no question because of the time. Given what you've just said, Matt, will you support the mandatory chemical castration of sex offenders being released back into the UK populace?
Assembly Member, thank you for your very direct question, the invitation for a yes or no answer. It's not a question I've considered in any detail, so I'm not going to guess an answer to it, but...
No, okay, fair enough.
Noted.
Deputy Mayor, have you considered castration for sex offenders?
I mean, I think it's an interesting thing, and I think goes importantly to whatever we do. It needs to be fully medically assessed. It needs to be fully ethically assessed.
The basic thought, we've got to think of different things, as Matt has just really articulated well. But yes or no, would you consider it?
I think we should consider it.
Great. Thank you both very much. Thank you, Chair.
And on that note, thank you very much to our panellists for attending this morning and for the really detailed and excellent answers to the questions that you've given, and also for being willing to stay for the extra time. Can I ask the committee to note the report and the discussion?
Noted.
Can I ask the committee to note the monthly report from MOPAC?
Noted.
Can we also delegate authority to me as chair in consultation with party group lead members to agree any output arising from this meeting? Can I ask the committee to note its work programme?
Noted.
The next meeting of the committee is scheduled to take place on the 2nd of July 2025 in this chamber in City Hall. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.